On April 1st, 2026, at 6:35 in the evening Eastern Time, a rocket carrying 4 human beings left the surface of the Earth and began a trajectory toward the Moon. The Space Launch System, the most powerful rocket ever built for crewed spaceflight, ignited its engines at Kennedy Space Center's Launch Pad 39B, the same historic site from which Apollo missions once departed. Inside the Orion spacecraft, named Integrity by its crew, sat NASA astronauts Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, and Christina Koch, alongside Canadian Space Agency astronaut Jeremy Hansen. For the first time in more than half a century, since the final Apollo mission in 1972, human beings were leaving Earth's orbit, and over 17 million people watched it happen live on YouTube. Now hold that image in your mind. 17 million concurrent viewers, distributed across NASA's official YouTube channel, its Twitch feed, its bespoke streaming service NASA Plus, Amazon Prime, Apple TV, Hulu, Netflix, HBO Max, and Roku. The agency's primary YouTube stream alone peaked at nearly 4 million simultaneous viewers during the launch sequence. This was not a broadcast. This was not a press conference. This was content, and it was optimized as such. NASA had spent months rolling out behind-the-scenes shorts, Meet the Astronaut profile videos, a zero-gravity indicator design contest that attracted 2,600 submissions from over 50 countries, and a curated multimedia resource page that treated the lunar flyby the way a major studio treats a tentpole franchise release. The Moon mission had a content calendar. Now hold a second image. On the same platform where those 17 million viewers watched a government agency send humans around the Moon, there exists a channel with 476 million subscribers. That channel belongs to a 27-year-old man from Greenville, North Carolina, whose legal name is Jimmy Donaldson, but who the world knows as MrBeast. His channel has accumulated over 117 billion lifetime views. His most recent videos, titles like Last Streamer Standing Wins $1 million and 50 Streamers Fight for $1 million, and have pulled tens of millions of views within days of posting. His holding company, Beast Industries, is valued at approximately $5 billion. His chocolate brand, Feastables, generated $250 million in sales in 2024 alone, out-earning his YouTube channel for the first time in the channel's history. He recently acquired Step, a fintech platform with over 7 million users. He is projected to generate $1.6 billion in total company revenue by 2026. And yet, in the popular imagination, he's still categorized as a YouTuber. These two phenomena, the Artemis II lunar mission and the MrBeast media empire, appear to exist in entirely different categories. One is a government space program carrying the institutional weight of NASA, the legacy of Apollo, and the geopolitical implications of American technological supremacy. The other is a content creator who built his audience by counting to 100,000 and giving strangers large sums of money. One operates in the domain of science, exploration, and national prestige. The other operates in the domain of thumbnails, retention curves, and algorithmic optimization. And yet, when you study both phenomena with sufficient depth, what emerges is not a contrast, but a convergence. Both are operating within the same structural logic. Both are products of the same underlying system. Both are manifestations of what this essay will argue is the defining feature of American media in the 2020s, the spectacle economy. The spectacle economy is not simply the attention economy by another name. The attention economy describes a system in which human attention is a scarce resource and economic value accrues to those who can capture and hold it. That framework, while useful, is incomplete. It describes the what, but not the how. The spectacle economy describes the specific mechanism through which attention is captured at scale in the current media environment through the production, distribution, and optimization of spectacle, which is to say, through the creation of events, images, narratives, and experiences whose primary function is to generate a state of astonishment, curiosity, or disbelief that compels engagement. Spectacle is not information. It is not entertainment in the traditional sense. It is an engineered emotional response designed to produce a specific behavioral outcome: the click, the view, the share, the subscribe. What makes this framework essential for understanding the present moment is that spectacle has ceased to be the exclusive province of entertainment. It has become the operating logic of institutions that were never designed around it. When NASA streams its lunar flyby across 7 simultaneous platforms, produces astronaut profile content formatted identically to influencer introduction videos, and generates 17 million concurrent YouTube viewers, it is not merely using modern media tools to communicate its mission. It is competing within the spectacle economy on the spectacle economy's terms. It is producing content whose structure, format, and distribution strategy are indistinguishable from those of the entertainment creators it shares platform space with. The government agency responsible for the most complex engineering feat in human history is now, at a structural level, doing the same thing as the 27-year-old who built his empire by microwaving a microwave. This is not a criticism. It is an observation about the nature of the system, and the system has a logic that, once you begin to trace it, reveals patterns that are far more unsettling and far more illuminating than the surface-level discourse about content creators and social media would suggest. There is an analogy here that illuminates the depth of what is operating. In financial markets, there exists a mechanism called price discovery, the process through which buyers and sellers interact to determine the market value of an asset. Price discovery is not imposed from above. It emerges from the aggregated decisions of millions of participants, each acting on their own information and their own interests. The result is a price that, in theory, reflects the collective assessment of the asset's worth. The YouTube algorithm operates as a price discovery mechanism for human attention. Each view, each click, each scroll past is a bid in an auction whose currency is not money but cognitive engagement. The algorithm aggregates these bids and produces an allocation. This content gets surfaced. This content gets suppressed. This content reaches millions. This content reaches no one. The allocation is not decided by editors or programmers. It emerges from the aggregate behavior of billions of users. And the outcome of this price discovery process is the spectacle economy's most consequential product. Not content, but a hierarchy of visibility. A ranking of what matters, determined not by importance, not by accuracy, not by social utility, but by the ability to generate the neurochemical response that produces a click. This is a genuinely novel structural condition in human history. Every previous media environment had human gatekeepers who imposed, however imperfectly, some relationship between the importance of information and the probability of its distribution. The newspaper editor decided what went on the front page. The television producer decided what led the evening news. The publishing house decided which books reached readers. These decisions were biased, partial, and often corrupt. But they were made by humans who operated, at least nominally, within frameworks that connected information distribution to assessments of importance. The algorithmic attention marketplace has no such framework. It has a single variable, engagement. And engagement, as a metric, is structurally disconnected from importance. A video of someone opening a mystery box generates more engagement than a detailed analysis of Federal Reserve policy, not because the mystery box is more important, but because the mystery box triggers a stronger neurochemical response. The algorithm does not know the difference. It cannot know the difference. It was not designed to know the difference. What this means, and what the rest of this essay will trace in specific detail, is that the spectacle economy has produced a fundamental inversion in the relationship between complexity and visibility. In every previous information environment, the most complex and consequential systems, governments, economies, legal frameworks, military operations, received the most sustained and serious attention from the media infrastructure. Not always accurately, not always fairly, but the attention was there. The spectacle economy has inverted this relationship. The most complex and consequential systems now receive the least attention because they are the least compressible into the formats that generate engagement. And the least complex, most spectacle-driven content receives the most attention because it is the most compressible. The inversion is total, and it is, as far as I can determine, unprecedented in the history of human information systems. Consider the following. MrBeast's channel, which began in 2012 as a teenage boy posting short Minecraft gameplay clips, has undergone a 14-year iterative evolution that mirrors, with remarkable precision, the trajectory of a venture-backed startup moving through product-market fit stages. His early content, gaming videos and commentary, was the equivalent of an MVP, a minimum viable product testing the market. His mid-period shift to shock value and giving away money was a pivot to growth stage tactics, trading margin for user acquisition. His current phase, industrial-scale production of reality show format content with budgets exceeding $3 to $5 million per video, represents a mature operation that has achieved what Silicon Valley calls escape velocity, a self-reinforcing loop where scale begets more scale. And yet, because he is categorized as a YouTuber rather than as a startup founder, the perception of his achievement is fundamentally distorted. This distortion is not accidental. It is, in fact, the source of his competitive advantage. Now, consider NASA. The Artemis program, which encompasses the broader goal of establishing a sustained human presence on the moon and eventually sending crews to Mars, carries a budget measured in tens of billions of dollars. The Space Launch System rocket alone cost over $23 billion to develop. The Orion spacecraft cost another $21 billion. The Artemis II mission, a 10-day test flight that sent 4 astronauts around the moon without landing, was the culmination of over a decade of engineering, testing, and political negotiation. It required the coordinated effort of thousands of engineers, scientists, contractors, and administrators across multiple agencies and countries. The heat shield technology alone, which uses a material called AV-coat that dates to the Apollo era, generated enough controversy to delay the mission by over a year. And yet, when this astonishing achievement was communicated to the public, the primary mechanism was a YouTube live stream with behind-the-scenes content, astronaut profile shorts, and a zero-gravity mascot designed by an 8-year-old. The gap between the depth of what is actually happening and the format through which it is communicated is the central tension of the spectacle economy. This gap is not new. The relationship between complex reality and simplified public representation has been a feature of media since the invention of the printing press. But what is new, and what this essay will argue constitutes a genuinely novel structural pattern, is the degree to which the simplification has been automated, optimized, and incentivized by algorithmic systems that reward spectacle above all other forms of communication. The algorithm does not care whether the content is a MrBeast challenge video or a lunar flyby. It cares about watch time, click-through rate, and engagement. And so the producers of content, whether they are 27-year-old entrepreneurs or federal agencies with budgets larger than some countries' GDP, converge on the same strategies. The thumbnail must compel. The title must create a curiosity gap. The first 30 seconds must hook. The spectacle must be maintained. And here is a specific numerical reality that crystallizes the structural asymmetry at play. NASA's YouTube channel has approximately 13.6 million subscribers. MrBeast's channel has 476 million. That is a ratio of roughly 35 to 1. The agency that sent human beings around the moon has 35 times fewer subscribers than the man who gives strangers money in parking lots. Now, there is nothing inherently wrong with this disparity. Subscriber counts are a measure of entertainment value, not institutional importance. But consider what this ratio means within the platform's architecture. YouTube's recommendation algorithm uses subscriber counts, along with watch history and engagement patterns, to determine which content is surfaced to which viewers. A channel with 476 million subscribers has a gravitational pull within the algorithm that is structurally incomparable to a channel with 13.6 million. When MrBeast uploads a video, the algorithm has 476 million data points, telling it who might want to watch. When NASA uploads a video, it has 13.6 million. The algorithm does not know that one channel represents a federal agency responsible for humanity's first return to the moon in half a century. It knows subscriber counts, engagement rates, and retention curves. And by those metrics, MrBeast is 35 times more important than NASA. This numerical asymmetry is not a quirk of the platform. It is the platform. YouTube's entire economic model is built on the principle that the content which generates the most engagement deserves the most distribution. There is no editorial override, no institutional weighting, no mechanism by which the platform says, this content is more important than that content, regardless of engagement metrics. The platform is structurally incapable of making that judgment. And so, the distribution of human attention, the most consequential resource allocation decision in the information economy, is governed entirely by the algorithm's engagement metrics. A lunar flyby competes for distribution on the same terms as a challenge video, and the challenge video, by the metrics that the algorithm uses, wins. This is the same structural dynamic that allowed T-Series, an Indian music and film production company, to hold the most subscribed YouTube channel title for years before MrBeast surpassed it in 2024. T-Series operates as a media company distributing Bollywood music videos and film trailers. Cocomelon, a children's animation channel, holds the second most subscribed position with over 180 million subscribers. Both are corporate media operations that use YouTube as a distribution channel for industrial-scale content production. The top of the YouTube hierarchy is not populated by individual creators expressing personal vision. It is populated by operations that have figured out how to produce content at the volume, consistency, and emotional frequency that the algorithm's reward structure demands. MrBeast's achievement is not that he made great videos, it is that he identified and executed the specific operational formula that the platform's architecture rewards. High frequency, high spectacle, high retention content produced at industrial scale with industrial capital. What follows in the remaining 9 sections of this essay is an attempt to trace this pattern with the specificity and depth it deserves. We will begin by excavating the archaeological record of MrBeast's channel, moving year by year through its evolution to show how a teenage gamer became the largest individual media operation in history, and what that evolution reveals about the hidden reward structures of the YouTube platform. We will then examine the specific mechanisms of spectacle production, from thumbnail optimization to the psychology of shock value, and show how these mechanisms create a desensitization cycle that demands ever-escalating stakes. We will analyze the structural parallels between MrBeast's content strategy and the way Netflix used Squid Game to merge global audiences, and how both phenomena tap into a deep cultural anxiety about the gamification of capitalism that manifests in media through franchises like The Hunger Games, The Purge, and Maze Runner. We will then turn to Beast Industries itself, the $5 billion holding company, and show how the transition from attention to equity represents a new model of capital formation that traditional financial frameworks are not equipped to analyze. We will examine how Feastables, a chocolate brand that did not exist before 2022, generates more profit than a YouTube channel with 117 billion lifetime views, and what that inversion tells us about where value actually resides in the creator economy. We will look at NASA's entry into the spectacle economy through Artemis II and ask what it means when a government institution must compete for attention using the same tools and formats as entertainment creators. We will explore the compression thesis, the idea that metrics flatten the infinite complexity of geopolitical reality into consumable content units, and how this compression obscures the deeper systems, from the petrodollar to marine insurance underwriting to the Strait of Hormuz, that actually govern the distribution of power and resources in the world. We will examine how discourse itself, from moon landing conspiracy theories to debates about MrBeast's philanthropy, functions not as a response to content, but as a distribution mechanism for it, a form of algorithmic fuel that the spectacle economy has learned to manufacture and exploit. And we will conclude by asking where this trajectory leads, what happens when the spectacle gradient reaches its natural limits, and whether there is any mechanism within the current media ecosystem capable of rewarding the kind of deep, structural understanding that the spectacle economy has been designed to displace. This is not a story about a YouTuber and a space mission. This is a story about the architecture of perception in 21st century America, about the systems that determine what gets seen and what remains invisible, about the hidden economics of astonishment, and about the profound, largely unexamined consequences of building an entire civilization's information infrastructure around the production of shock. Let us begin. To understand what MrBeast is, you have to go back to what MrBeast was. And what MrBeast was, in the beginning, was indistinguishable from 10,000 other teenage boys posting gaming clips on a platform that had not yet figured out what it was becoming. The channel was created on February 20th, 2012. Jimmy Donaldson was 13 years old. His first surviving video, titled Worst Minecraft Saw Trap Ever, is a short clip of him playing Minecraft, the sandbox game that was, at that point, experiencing an unprecedented wave of cultural penetration. This is important to register. The first strategic decision that would eventually lead to a 476 million subscriber empire was not a decision at all. It was the act of a teenager doing what teenagers do, playing a popular video game and recording it. There was no strategy, there was no optimization, there was no moat. There was a kid in a bedroom, a screen capture, and a platform that was still in its infancy as a creator ecosystem. Now here is what matters. In 2012, the YouTube platform operated at an entirely different dimension of competition than it does today. The sheer volume of content being uploaded was a fraction of what it would become. The algorithm, still in its relatively early stages, was far less sophisticated in its ability to sort and surface content. This meant that a teenage boy posting 2-minute Minecraft clips could receive outsized returns in viewership simply by being present. He was not competing against an oversaturated field. He was feeding data to a system that was hungry for data and had not yet developed the filters that would later make discoverability so difficult. This is what economists call first-mover advantage, but it is a specific variant of first-mover advantage that is unique to platform economies. The advantage of being present during a platform's growth phase, when the ratio of content supply to audience demand strongly favors the creator. For the next 2 years, from 2012 to 2014, the channel is almost entirely composed of gaming content, Minecraft videos, Pokemon battle videos. He is riding the wave of what was popular in the gaming community at that time, producing content that is functionally identical to what thousands of other channels were producing. The thumbnails are not optimized. The titles are descriptive but not engineered. The production quality is minimal. He is, in the language of startup culture, shipping product rapidly without concern for polish, building the muscle memory of consistent posting, and, crucially, building a relationship with the algorithm through sheer volume of data. This is where the first hidden pattern emerges, and it is one that very few commentators on MrBeast's rise have identified. During this early period, the act of playing video games and posting the footage was serving a dual function. On the surface, he was producing content, but at a deeper level, he was solving a problem that kills most content creators before they ever gain traction: the habit formation problem. The challenge of posting consistently on YouTube is not primarily a creative challenge, it is a psychological challenge. It requires the daily investment of time and energy into an activity that, for most creators, produces no immediate return. The feedback loops are slow. The audience, in the early stages, is non-existent or negligible. The temptation to stop is enormous. What Donaldson did, whether consciously or unconsciously, was link the act of content creation to an activity that already had a strong dopaminergic feedback loop: playing video games. He was not just recording himself playing, he was hijacking the reward circuitry of gaming, the immediate feedback, the variable reinforcement schedules, the sense of progression, and channeling it into the habit of creating and posting. He was extracting value from what would otherwise be leisure time, dead time, and converting it into production. This is not a minor detail. It is arguably the foundational psychological mechanism that made everything else possible. By 2014, 2 years into the channel's life, a new pattern begins to emerge. Alongside the gaming content, Donaldson starts posting videos with titles like, "How much money does PewDiePie make?" At the time, PewDiePie was one of the most prominent YouTubers on the platform, a Swedish creator whose gaming commentary channel had become a cultural phenomenon. Donaldson's decision to make videos analyzing PewDiePie's earnings was not, at its surface, a particularly innovative content strategy. Many smaller creators were making similar videos, but what it reveals, when you study the pattern across multiple videos, is a specific strategic instinct that would later scale into the core of his media operation. The "How much money does PewDiePie make?" videos served 3 simultaneous functions. First, they addressed a genuine curiosity that existed within the YouTube ecosystem, the question of whether content creation could be a viable career. This was 2014. YouTube as a full-time profession was still a relatively new concept. Young people who were considering this path, and young men in particular who constituted the core of the gaming YouTube audience, wanted to know if the economics worked. By producing videos that answered this question, Donaldson was positioning himself as a source of insider knowledge about the platform itself. He was not just a gamer. He was a gamer who understood the business of gaming on YouTube. Second, and this is the more strategically significant function, these videos served as a cross-pollination mechanism. When you title a video, "How much money does PewDiePie make?" you are effectively inserting your content into the search and recommendation orbit of a much larger creator. Anyone searching for PewDiePie-related content, anyone clicking on videos about PewDiePie, anyone in the recommendation flow that the algorithm has built around PewDiePie's audience, now has a chance of encountering your video. This is not audience theft. It is audience adjacency. And it was a tactic that Donaldson deployed repeatedly. He made similar videos about Captain Sparkles, about FaZe Clan members, about every major creator whose audience overlapped with his own. Each video was a node in a network of cross-pollination that gradually expanded the surface area of his channel's discoverability. Third, and most subtly, these videos were a form of self-education. By researching and analyzing the economics of other creators, by studying how much revenue was generated at various subscriber counts and view thresholds, Donaldson was building a mental model of YouTube's economic architecture. He was reverse engineering the platform's monetization system in public, using his content as both a product and a research methodology. This is something that has been almost entirely overlooked in the discourse about his rise. The How Much Money videos were not just content. They were market research conducted at zero cost, with the research itself generating views and subscribers. By 2015, 3 years into the channel's existence, the content becomes genuinely heterogeneous in a way that, on the surface, looks like a lack of focus. Alongside the gaming videos and the creator economy analyses, Donaldson is posting videos with titles like, "What happens if you get a copyright strike?" 5 steps to becoming successful on YouTube, YouTube Analytics Explained, Modern Art is a Joke, How to Do a High School or College Paper, What is Crohn's Disease, and How Rich is BuzzFeed? The channel, at this point, looks like the unfiltered output of a teenage mind that is interested in everything and disciplined about nothing. There is no coherent brand. There is no content strategy in the traditional sense. It is, to use Donaldson's own framing from the period, just posting. But there is a deeper pattern operating beneath the surface chaos. If you sort these videos not by topic but by function, they fall into 4 distinct categories. First, YouTube insider content designed to attract aspiring creators and cross-pollinate with larger channels. Second, gaming content designed to maintain the core audience and sustain the posting habit. Third, commentary and opinion content designed to generate discourse, meaning content that is optimized not for information, but for the reaction it provokes, the arguments it starts, the shares it generates. And fourth, something harder to categorize, a kind of raw intellectual curiosity content that seems to have no strategic function at all, but that reveals the breadth of Donaldson's engagement with the world beyond the platform. This 4-category structure is important because it shows that even before Donaldson had any conscious strategy, the channel was already diversifying its appeal across multiple audience segments. The gaming audience, the aspiring creator audience, the commentary audience, and the general interest audience were all receiving content. The channel was, in effect, conducting A/B tests across multiple content verticals simultaneously, with the algorithm serving as the testing infrastructure and view counts serving as the metric. What worked would get more investment, what didn't would get dropped. This is not strategy in the traditional sense. It is something closer to evolutionary selection, with the algorithm acting as the selective pressure and Donaldson's prolific output providing the variation. Throughout this period, his thumbnails tell their own story. In the earliest videos, there are no custom thumbnails at all. YouTube auto-generates a frame from the video, and that is what appears. By 2014, he begins using simple custom thumbnails, usually a blue background with white text and an image, but they are crude, amateurish, and undifferentiated from the thousands of similar channels in the same niche. By 2015, the thumbnails are slightly more polished, but still lack the engineered quality that would later become his signature. They are functional, but not optimized. They convey what the video is about, but do not create the kind of irresistible visual curiosity gap that would later drive his click-through rates to levels that made his channel algorithmically unstoppable. The thumbnail evolution is worth dwelling on because it reveals something crucial about the relationship between platform infrastructure and creator behavior. In the early years of YouTube, thumbnails mattered less because the discovery mechanism was different. Videos were found through search, through subscriptions, and through the relatively unsophisticated recommendation sidebar. As the platform evolved and the recommendation algorithm became the primary driver of viewership, thumbnails became the single most important variable in a video's performance. They became, in effect, the packaging. And on a platform where the product is attention, the packaging is the product. But in 2012, 2013, 2014, this was not yet the case. Donaldson's indifference to thumbnails in this period was not a failure. It was appropriate to the platform's state of development. There is also a biographical detail that surfaces in this period and that has been largely ignored in the mainstream discourse about MrBeast's rise. In 2015, he posted a video titled, "What is Crohn's Disease?" Crohn's disease is a chronic inflammatory condition of the gastrointestinal tract, and Donaldson himself was diagnosed with it. This is relevant not because of the personal health dimension, but because of what it reveals about the psychological conditions under which the channel was being built. A teenager dealing with a chronic illness, posting content daily from his bedroom, turning video games into a posting habit, researching the economics of the platform he was betting his future on, and doing it all without any of the institutional support structures, the managers, the production teams, the capital that the term YouTuber now implies. The channel in this period was being built through what can only be described as a kind of obsessive, unsupported iteration. There was no external validation that this was going to work. There was only the algorithm's feedback, the slow accumulation of subscribers, and the internal drive to keep posting. The subscriber milestone data for this period tells its own story about the economics of platform growth, and it is a story that contradicts the popular narrative of sudden viral success. Donaldson reached 1,000 subscribers on April 14, 2014, more than 2 years after creating the channel. 1,000 subscribers in 2 years. That is approximately 1.4 new subscribers per day, averaged across 784 days of posting. He did not reach 10,000 subscribers until October 28, 2015, 3.5 years in. He reached 50,000 on June 11, 2016, and 100,000 on July 8, 2016. The acceleration from 50,000 to 100,000 took only 27 days, suggesting that a threshold effect was beginning to operate. The algorithm was starting to recognize the channel's engagement patterns and was beginning to surface it to larger audiences. But even 100,000 subscribers, impressive as it was relative to the creator population, was reached only after 4 years and 4 months of continuous posting. These numbers matter because they reveal something about the platform's economics that is almost never discussed. YouTube, like all platform marketplaces, operates on a principle that economists call cross-subsidization. The platform needs content to attract viewers, and it needs viewers to attract advertisers. In the early stages of a creator's growth, the creator is contributing more to the platform in the form of content that attracts viewers than they are receiving from the platform in the form of views and revenue. The platform, in effect, is being subsidized by the creator's labor. The creator is producing content for free or for negligible compensation, and the platform is using that content to build its audience, sell advertising, and generate revenue that the creator does not share in. This dynamic inverts only when the creator reaches a scale at which their individual contribution to the platform's advertising revenue becomes significant enough to warrant meaningful revenue sharing. For most creators, this inversion never happens. They remain in the subsidy phase indefinitely, producing content that benefits the platform far more than it benefits them. Donaldson spent 4 years in this phase, producing hundreds of videos that generated minimal personal revenue, but that contributed to YouTube's content ecosystem and helped the platform maintain the content volume it needed to retain viewers and sell advertising. By the end of 2015, the channel had reached 100,000 subscribers. In the context of 2026, where the channel has 476 million subscribers, 100,000 sounds trivial. But in the context of 2015, it was a threshold that placed Donaldson in the top fraction of a percent of YouTube creators. It was, more importantly, the point at which the channel became viable as a potential career. YouTube's partner program, which allows creators to monetize their content through advertising, had a subscriber threshold, and 100,000 represented a meaningful milestone in the professionalization of the channel. He had spent 3 years, from 13 to 16 years old, building a channel through raw volume gaming content and cross-pollination tactics, and he had arrived at the first inflection point. What happened next, in the transition from 2015 to 2017, was the phase shift that would transform the channel from one of thousands of mid-tier YouTube operations into the beginning of what it would become. And to understand that phase shift, you have to understand something about the nature of the platform at that moment in time. YouTube in 2016 and 2017 was undergoing its own version of what the technology industry calls a platform maturation cycle. The early wave of creators, the gaming commentators, the vloggers, the sketch comedy channels, had established the medium's conventions. Audiences knew what YouTube content looked like. And because they knew what it looked like, it was becoming harder to stand out by doing more of the same. The platform was entering a phase where differentiation, not just consistency, was becoming the primary driver of growth. And differentiation, in an attention economy, means doing something that has not been done before. Something that breaks the pattern, something that, when compressed into a thumbnail and a title, makes the viewer stop scrolling because what they are seeing does not fit into any category they have previously encountered. This is the moment when the spectacle enters the picture, and this is the moment when Jimmy Donaldson, the teenage gamer from North Carolina, begins to become MrBeast. The transition starts small, a video titled, "I mailed myself in a box, and it really worked." Then, microwaving a microwave. Then, microwaving dry ice. Then, perhaps most significantly, counting to 200,000. These videos are crude. The production value is negligible. The spectacle is not grand. It is, in most cases, a single person doing something that is simultaneously pointless and fascinating, something that creates an irreducible curiosity in the viewer. Did he really do that? Was this real? What happened? The spectacle, in its nascent form, is simply the creation of an event that cannot be resolved by looking at the thumbnail. You have to watch the video to find out. And that gap between the promise of the thumbnail and the resolution of the question is the fundamental mechanism of the attention economy. What Donaldson had discovered, likely through the same process of iterative experimentation that had characterized the entire channel up to that point, was that spectacle, even poorly executed spectacle, generated disproportionate returns. A video about microwaving a microwave, which cost essentially nothing to produce, could outperform weeks of carefully researched commentary content. The algorithm was telling him something. And unlike the vast majority of creators who either ignore the algorithm's signals or lack the willingness to follow them to their logical conclusion, Donaldson listened. He followed the signal. He did more of what worked. And over the next 2 years, through a process of relentless iteration and escalation, he would transform that signal into the most powerful content engine the platform had ever seen. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. The archaeology of the platform, the 14-year record of gradual iteration, is important in itself. Because what it shows is not the story that the media has told about MrBeast. The media story is one of sudden, almost magical success. A guy who started giving away money and went viral. That story is wrong. What the archaeological record shows is a story of slow accumulation, of years of unremarkable output building toward a threshold, of a creator who spent 3 years learning the platform's economics in public, who spent 2 more years experimenting across every content category he could think of, who built the posting habit by tying it to dopaminergic loops, and who, when the platform's maturation cycle created an opening for differentiation through spectacle, was positioned, through all those years of accumulated platform knowledge and posting discipline, to exploit that opening faster and more completely than anyone else. This is not the story of a YouTuber. This is the story of a founder. And the distinction matters more than most people realize. There's a law operating inside the spectacle economy that no one has named, but that governs everything. Call it the spectacle gradient. It works like this. The first time a viewer encounters a spectacle, the spectacle captures attention through the force of novelty. But the second time they encounter a spectacle of equivalent magnitude, the novelty is diminished. The third time, it is diminished further. And by the 10th time, what was once astonishing has become background noise. The spectacle economy, therefore, is not a steady state. It is a treadmill. And the treadmill only moves in one direction, toward escalation. This law explains the entire arc of MrBeast's content evolution from 2017 to the present, and it explains it with a precision that no other framework can match. Once Donaldson discovered that spectacle, even crude spectacle like microwaving a microwave generated outsized returns, he faced the same structural problem that every drug dealer, every arms manufacturer, and every reality television producer eventually faces: tolerance. His audience would adapt. What shocked them in year 1 would bore them by year 3. And so the spectacle had to escalate. Not gradually, relentlessly. The escalation followed a remarkably consistent trajectory. In the early spectacle phase, roughly 2017 to 2018, the videos were what we might call amateur spectacle, counting to 200,000, reading the longest English word, microwaving my iPhone. These are stunts that a single person can execute with minimal resources. The spectacle resides entirely in the premise, the absurdity of someone actually committing to doing something that no reasonable person would do. The cost of production is negligible. The entertainment value derives from the willingness to waste time and destroy things in ways that feel transgressive, that violate the viewer's sense of what is rational or proportionate. Then a critical shift occurs. Donaldson begins giving away money, giving a random homeless man $10,000, tipping delivery driver $10,000, tipping Uber driver $10,000, donating to Twitch streamers. This shift is often described in the media as the moment MrBeast found his formula. But that framing obscures what actually happened. What happened was a discovery about the economics of spectacle production. Specifically, Donaldson discovered that money itself could be used as a production input to generate spectacle. Instead of spending money on sets, actors, and equipment, the way traditional media produces spectacle, he could spend money directly, giving it to people on camera, and the act of giving would itself become the spectacle. The production budget was the content. The expense was the entertainment. This is a genuinely novel insight in the history of media economics. In traditional entertainment, the production budget is a cost that must be recouped through revenue. A film that costs $100 million to make must generate more than $100 million in box office and ancillary revenue to be profitable. The budget is an input, and the output, the entertainment, is something separate from it. In Donaldson's model, the budget and the output are the same thing. When he gives a homeless man $10,000 and films it, the $10,000 is simultaneously the production cost and the content. The audience is watching the money being spent. The spectacle is the transaction itself. This collapses the distinction between production and product in a way that traditional media economics has no framework for analyzing. And because the spectacle is the money, escalation becomes straightforward but also structurally inevitable. If giving away $10,000 generates a certain number of views, then giving away $100,000 should generate more. And if 100,000 generates a certain number, then 1 million should generate more still. The gradient is literal and mathematical. More money equals more spectacle, equals more views, equals more revenue, equals more money to give away. It is a flywheel, but it is a flywheel that can only spin faster. It cannot maintain speed. The moment it decelerates, the moment the spectacle fails to exceed expectations, the tolerance sets in and the views decline. Now here is where the thumbnail analysis becomes essential, because the spectacle gradient does not operate purely through the content itself. It operates primarily through the thumbnail and the title, which are the viewer's first and often only point of contact with the video before the decision to click. Donaldson's thumbnail evolution, which I mentioned in the previous section, becomes a science during this period. And I use the word science deliberately. By 2018 and 2019, roughly 7 to 8 years into the channel's existence, the thumbnails undergo a transformation that is as significant as any content shift. They move from amateur designs, blue backgrounds with white text, to carefully engineered visual compositions that follow a specific set of principles. First, the thumbnail must contain a single dominant visual element that communicates the scale of the spectacle. If the video is about giving away $100,000, the thumbnail shows stacks of cash so large they seem impossible to hold. If the video is about surviving on an island, the thumbnail shows Donaldson in a tattered shirt with help and day 6 visible, placing the viewer at a specific point in the narrative without revealing the outcome. Second, the thumbnail must create an information gap, a question that the viewer cannot answer by looking at the image alone. Did he really give away that much money? Did he really survive 6 days? The only way to resolve the question is to watch the video. Third, the thumbnail must be legible at the scale of a mobile phone screen, which is the primary device through which YouTube content is consumed. This means high contrast, bold colors, large text, and no fine detail. Everything must be readable in a space the size of a postage stamp. This thumbnail methodology is not unique to MrBeast. Many successful YouTube creators follow similar principles, but what is unique is the degree of iteration and the scale of investment that Donaldson brought to the practice. He has publicly stated that he and his team will produce dozens of thumbnail variations for a single video, testing them against each other to find the one that maximizes click-through rate. He has described the thumbnail as the most important variable in a video's performance, more important than the content itself. And the data supports this. On YouTube, a video's algorithmic fate is largely determined in the first few hours after upload. If the click-through rate is high, the algorithm surfaces the video to more viewers, creating a compounding effect. If the click-through rate is low, the video is suppressed, regardless of how good the content might be. The thumbnail, therefore, is not a marketing asset. It is the product's primary interface with the market. It is the bottle's label, the book's cover, and the store's window display, all compressed into a single image that must perform its function in less than a second of scrolled attention. This is where the competitive moat begins to form, because while the content strategy of giving away money can, in theory, be replicated by anyone with capital, the thumbnail optimization methodology requires a form of expertise that is not easily transferable. It requires understanding the psychology of visual attention at an almost academic level of depth. It requires an iterative testing infrastructure that most creators do not have the resources or discipline to build. And it requires a willingness to treat the creative output not as art, but as engineering, subjecting every element to quantitative measurement and discarding what does not perform. This combination of capital-intensive content production and engineering-grade packaging optimization created a barrier to entry that protected Donaldson's position in a market where barriers to entry are notoriously low. There is a financial analogy that illuminates the depth of what is happening here, and it is one that I have not seen articulated elsewhere. In financial markets, a derivative is an instrument whose value is derived from an underlying asset. A stock option derives its value from the stock it references. A futures contract derives its value from the commodity it represents. The derivative is not the thing itself. It is a representation of the thing, optimized for tradability. The thumbnail is a derivative of the video. Its value is derived from the underlying content, but it is not the content itself. It is a compressed representation, optimized for the specific marketplace in which it trades, the attention marketplace of the YouTube feed. And like financial derivatives, the thumbnail can become more important than the underlying asset. In the 2008 financial crisis, the derivative instruments, the mortgage-backed securities and credit default swaps, became so disconnected from the underlying mortgages that the entire system lost its relationship to the real economy. Something structurally similar is happening in the spectacle economy. The thumbnail, the derivative, has become so optimized, so disconnected from the underlying content, that the system has partially lost its relationship to the reality it represents. A thumbnail showing a person in apparent mortal danger on an island derives its click-through value from the implied spectacle of danger, but the underlying content contains no actual danger. A thumbnail showing an impossibly large stack of cash derives its value from the implied spectacle of extreme wealth distribution, but the underlying content may involve a carefully structured challenge where the cash is recovered through the economics of viewer engagement. The derivative trades on a promise that the underlying only partially fulfills, and the audience, like the investors who purchased mortgage-backed securities without examining the underlying loans, accepts the derivative at face value because examining the underlying requires more effort than the system's interface encourages. This derivative structure has a second-order effect that is even more significant. It means that the primary competition in the spectacle economy is not a competition of content, but a competition of representations. The creators who win are not the creators who produce the best videos. They are the creators who produce the best thumbnails, the best derivatives for the attention marketplace. The content must be adequate, must deliver enough of the promised spectacle to prevent the viewer from feeling defrauded, but it does not need to be extraordinary. What needs to be extraordinary is the packaging. This inverts the traditional relationship between product and marketing. In most industries, a superior product is the primary competitive advantage, and marketing exists to communicate that superiority. In the spectacle economy, the marketing is the primary competitive advantage, and the product exists to adequately fulfill the marketing's promise. The packaging leads, the product follows. And the gap between the packaging and the product, the space between what the thumbnail promises and what the video delivers, is the structural zone where the spectacle economy generates its value and where the viewer's trust is perpetually negotiated. By 2020, 6 years into the channel's significant growth phase and roughly 8 years after its founding, the spectacle gradient had escalated to what can only be described as industrial scale. The videos were no longer pranks or stunts or simple money giveaways. They were productions. I bought everything in a store. I opened the world's first free store, spending 24 hours on top of a mountain. Each video required planning, logistics, legal review, and a production team. Each video cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and eventually millions to produce. The format had evolved from a guy microwaving a microwave to something that was structurally indistinguishable from a reality television episode. The sets were elaborate. The challenges were designed with the same kind of narrative arc that a showrunner would impose on a competition series. The participants were selected for their entertainment value. The editing was professional. The pacing was optimized for retention. The only thing that separated it from network television was the platform, YouTube instead of NBC. And this is where the framing problem becomes critical, because the platform matters, not just as a distribution channel, but as a perceptual frame. When the audience sees a reality competition show on NBC, they understand it as a product of a television network. They place it in the context of a media industry with budgets, production companies, advertisers, and regulatory oversight. They assess it against other television shows, but when the audience sees a structurally identical show on YouTube, they place it in the context of individual creators. They assess it against other YouTube videos. The competitive set shifts entirely. And because the competitive set shifts, the perception of the achievement shifts. A reality competition show on NBC is impressive but expected. A reality competition show on YouTube, produced by a single creator, is perceived as extraordinary. The same product, evaluated in different contexts, produces radically different assessments of its significance. This is the miscontextualization advantage. which we will explore in much greater depth in the next section. But it is worth noting here because it interacts with the spectacle gradient in a way that amplifies both phenomena. The spectacle gradient drives the content toward ever greater production scale, which makes the content increasingly indistinguishable from traditional media. But the platform context ensures that the content is never evaluated as traditional media. It is always evaluated as YouTube. And so the gap between what the content actually is, a multi-million-dollar production with a team of dozens, and what the audience perceives it as, a YouTuber making videos, grows wider and wider. This gap is not a bug. It is the feature. It is the source of the astonishment. And astonishment is the raw material of the spectacle economy. Now here is the paradox that emerges at the far end of the spectacle gradient. Donaldson himself identified this in his content data. Some of his highest performing videos are the ones that combine spectacle with genuine uncertainty. 7 Days Stranded on an Island, $456,000 Squid Game in real life. The audience engagement is highest when the spectacle feels real, when there is a genuine sense of risk, consequence, or unpredictability. But some of his lower performing videos are the ones where the spectacle tips into pure clickbait. 7 Days Stranded at Sea, world's deadliest obstacle course. The audience, having watched enough MrBeast content, has developed a calibration for the relationship between the claim and the reality. They know that world's deadliest does not actually mean deadly. They know that the production team is present, that safety protocols are in place, that the spectacle operates within boundaries. The clickbait title, rather than amplifying the spectacle, undermines it because it promises a level of extremity that the viewer knows will not be delivered. This creates a structural tension at the heart of the spectacle gradient. The gradient demands escalation. But escalation, past a certain point, triggers the viewer's skepticism, which reduces engagement, which requires further escalation to overcome the skepticism, which triggers further skepticism. It is a classic diminishing returns problem, and it is one that every spectacle-driven media operation eventually confronts. The history of reality television is, in many ways, the history of this exact problem. Survivor begat Fear Factor, begat Jackass, begat Wipeout, begat an endless succession of increasingly extreme formats, each of which enjoyed a period of novelty before the audience's tolerance caught up. What distinguishes Donaldson's approach from traditional reality television is not that he has solved this problem, but that he has identified it and is attempting to outrun it through diversification, through building an empire, Beast Industries, that can generate revenue independent of the spectacle gradient's limitations. But the deeper point is this. The spectacle gradient is not just a feature of MrBeast's channel, it is a feature of the entire media ecosystem. It is operating everywhere, in every platform, in every content category, from news to politics to science communication. And when it operates at the institutional level, when government agencies and scientific organizations begin optimizing for spectacle in the same way that a YouTube creator does, the consequences extend far beyond entertainment. They extend into the structure of public understanding itself, because spectacle, by its nature, is a compression technology. It takes complex reality and compresses it into a single attention-capturing image, title, or moment. The compression is necessary because the attention economy's fundamental constraint is not information but processing capacity. There is more information available than any person can process. And so the information that gets processed is the information that has been most effectively compressed, which is to say, the information that has been most effectively stripped of its complexity and converted into spectacle. The deeper the complexity, the more aggressively it must be compressed to compete for attention. And the more aggressively it is compressed, the more the complexity is lost. This is the mechanism through which the spectacle gradient operates on public understanding. It does not suppress information. It does not censor. It does something more subtle and more corrosive. It creates a competitive environment in which complex, nuanced, structurally deep information is systematically disadvantaged relative to simple, spectacular, emotionally triggering information. Not because anyone decided to disadvantage it, but because the algorithm rewards what gets clicked. And what gets clicked is what has been most effectively compressed into spectacle. The MrBeast channel is, in this sense, not an anomaly. It is a perfected expression of the system's logic, and the system's logic, once you trace it to its conclusion, has implications that extend far beyond YouTube. It has implications for how we understand everything from space exploration to economic policy to the distribution of power in the world. But to trace those implications, we first need to understand the mechanism that allows the spectacle to be so effective in the first place, the miscontextualization engine. Imagine a young woman who goes through Y Combinator, the most prestigious startup accelerator in the world. She raises $500,000 in early seed capital. After YC Demo Day, she closes a $2 million round. She launches a biotech firm. She has institutional backing, a network of advisors that includes alumni from companies like Airbnb, Dropbox, and Scale AI, and access to the kind of strategic infrastructure that most entrepreneurs spend years trying to build. Now, as one of her marketing verticals, she decides to create content on social media. She has a growing tech company's budget. She has professional aesthetics. She produces polished, high-quality videos that showcase her work and her personality. Here's the question. If people encounter her content and categorize her as a YC-backed startup founder who also has a YouTube channel, how do they perceive her? The answer is that they barely perceive her at all. A YC founder with a YouTube channel is unremarkable. It is expected. It does not trigger any sense of astonishment or curiosity because it is legible within existing categories. Tech founders do marketing. Marketing sometimes includes social media. There's nothing to explain. But now, reverse the framing. Same person, same resources, same content. But people encounter her content first and categorize her as a content creator, a social media influencer, a YouTuber who also happens to be a YC-backed founder. Now everything changes. Now she is perceived as extraordinary. A YouTuber who got into Y Combinator, a content creator who raised venture capital, a social media influencer who is running a biotech company. The same set of facts, arranged in a different perceptual order, produces a radically different assessment of the person's significance. The YouTuber who is also a founder is perceived as brilliant, as exceptional, as operating at a level that transcends the normal boundaries of their category. The founder who is also a YouTuber is perceived as just another tech person doing marketing. This is not a thought experiment. This is the exact mechanism through which MrBeast's public perception operates. And it is, I would argue, the single most underanalyzed dimension of his entire phenomenon. Jimmy Donaldson is, at the structural level, a startup founder. Beast Industries, his holding company, has raised over $450 million in institutional capital. His investors include Alpha Wave Global, a New York-based investment firm that manages billions in assets. His company is valued at approximately $5 billion. He employs hundreds of people. His operations span consumer packaged goods, fintech, software, media production, and as of February 2026, a banking platform with over 7 million users. He recently hired Jeff Hausenbold, a veteran venture executive, to serve as the company's chief operating officer with a mandate to cut $100 million in annual costs. He has publicly discussed plans for an eventual IPO. His company's investor documents project revenue growing from $899 million in 2025 to $1.6 billion in 2026 and $4.78 billion by 2029. By any reasonable definition, this is a technology and consumer products conglomerate. It operates at the same scale and with the same financial complexity as companies that are covered by the Wall Street Journal and analyzed by equity research teams. And yet, in the public imagination, Jimmy Donaldson is a YouTuber. He is discussed in the cultural press, not the business press. He's analyzed through the lens of internet culture, not corporate strategy. He's categorized alongside other content creators, not alongside other consumer products, CEOs. The framing is the thing, and the framing is wrong. Not factually wrong, he is indeed on YouTube, but categorically wrong in a way that produces a systematic distortion of how his achievement is perceived, and, crucially, how his competitive position is understood. The distortion works as follows. When the public sees MrBeast as a YouTuber who has built a $5 billion company, the narrative is one of miraculous individual achievement. A kid from North Carolina who started making videos in his bedroom and became a billionaire. This is an astonishing story. It fits the template of the American dream, the bootstrap narrative of individual genius, overcoming modest origins. And it is, in a narrow sense, true. But it is true in the same way that saying Einstein was a patent clerk who revolutionized physics is true. It is technically accurate and profoundly misleading because what the narrative omits is the infrastructure. It omits the $450 million in institutional capital. It omits the team of over 200 employees. It omits the C-suite executives recruited from Silicon Valley. It omits the production budgets that exceed $3 to $5 million per video. It omits the data analytics operation that A/B tests thumbnails with the same rigor that a pharmaceutical company tests drug formulations. It omits the platform dynamics, first mover advantage, algorithmic subsidy during YouTube's growth phase, the compounding effects of scale that created the structural conditions for the channel's growth. All of this is replaced by a single, clean, spectacular narrative, the YouTuber. And here is the competitive advantage. Because the public perceives MrBeast as a YouTuber, they evaluate him against other YouTubers. And against other YouTubers, his achievement is incomprehensible. No other individual creator has 476 million subscribers. No other individual creator generates billions of views per month. No other individual creator has built a consumer products empire with this kind of revenue and valuation. When the competitive set is YouTubers, MrBeast is not just winning. He's playing a different game. He appears superhuman. But if you change the competitive set, if you evaluate Beast Industries against other consumer products, conglomerates, the picture changes entirely. A $5 billion valuation for a company generating roughly $900 million in annual revenue is a revenue multiple of approximately 5.5 times. That is within the normal range for a high-growth consumer brand. Feastables, generating $250 million in revenue with $20 million in profit, has margins that are respectable but not extraordinary by CPG industry standards. What is extraordinary is the customer acquisition cost, which approaches zero because Donaldson's existing audience provides the marketing. But this is structurally analogous to what any brand with a built-in distribution channel enjoys. It is the same advantage that a television network has when it promotes its own shows to its own viewers. It is powerful, but it is not miraculous. It is simply vertical integration applied to the creator economy. Similarly, if you evaluate MrBeast's content operation against traditional media production companies, the picture normalizes. A production company spending $250 million annually on content, generating comparable revenue, but losing $80 million on the media side, would be described as a growth stage media business with an unsustainable cost structure that is being subsidized by a profitable consumer products division. That is a perfectly legible business description. There is nothing extraordinary about it. Companies like Vice Media, BuzzFeed, and The Athletic have all operated variations of this model. What makes it seem extraordinary is the YouTuber frame. When you tell someone that a YouTuber is spending $5 million per video and losing $80 million on content production, it sounds insane. When you tell them that a media company is investing heavily in content to build audience for its consumer brands, it sounds like a strategy. The miscontextualization, therefore, is not just a matter of public perception. It is a strategic asset. It prevents competitors from understanding what they are actually competing against. A creator who looks at MrBeast and thinks, I need to make better videos to compete with him, is making the same category error as a corner store that looks at Walmart and thinks, I need to stock better products. The videos are the storefront, the empire is the supply chain, the cattle, the distribution network, the data infrastructure, and the institutional resources behind it. And because the empire is hidden behind the YouTuber label, most potential competitors never see it. They are competing against a phantom. This mechanism, the generation of outsized perception through categorical misplacement, is what I am calling the miscontextualization engine, and it operates well beyond MrBeast. It operates in any domain where a player from one category enters another category and is evaluated by the standards of the new category rather than the old. The venture-backed founder making TikToks, the Fortune 500 company launching a direct-to-consumer brand that looks like an indie startup, the government agency producing content that looks like a creator's vlogs. In each case, the mismatch between the actual resources and infrastructure behind the operation and the category in which it is perceived creates a perception gap. And perception gaps in a media environment governed by astonishment are the most valuable asset of all. There is a formal economic concept embedded here that I want to name precisely: categorical arbitrage. In financial markets, arbitrage is the practice of exploiting price differences between markets. If a stock trades at $100 on one exchange and $102 on another, an arbitrageur can buy on the cheaper exchange and sell on the more expensive one, capturing the $2 difference. Categorical arbitrage operates on the same principle but applies to perception rather than price. When an entity operates in one category but is perceived as belonging to another, there is a price difference between the entity's actual capabilities and the expectations of the perceived category. The entity captures this difference as outsized perception, greater admiration, greater astonishment, greater attention than the entity's actual capabilities would warrant if correctly categorized. MrBeast is executing categorical arbitrage at a scale that has no precedent. His actual capabilities, measured objectively, are those of a well-funded consumer products conglomerate with sophisticated marketing infrastructure. These capabilities, in the conglomerate category, would produce a moderate level of interest from business analysts and investors. But because these capabilities are perceived in the YouTuber category, where nothing comparable has ever existed, they produce an extraordinary level of astonishment from the general public, the media, and even the investment community. The difference between the moderate interest and the extraordinary astonishment is the arbitrage profit. And that profit is not measured in dollars, it is measured in attention, which is the spectacle economy's fundamental currency. The concept of categorical arbitrage also explains a pattern that has been visible across the technology industry for the past 2 decades, but that has never been given a precise name. When Elon Musk launched Tesla, the company was perceived as an automobile company, but its actual capabilities and its valuation derived from the fact that it was operating as a technology company that happened to make cars. The categorical arbitrage between automobile company and technology company produced a valuation premium that traditional automakers could not access because they were correctly categorized. When Airbnb launched, it was perceived as a hospitality company, but its actual capabilities, software platform, network effects, were those of a technology company. The categorical arbitrage produced outsized attention and investment relative to traditional hotel companies. In each case, the entity's power derived not from being the best in its perceived category, but from being miscategorized in a way that produced a perception gap. The distinction between MrBeast's categorical arbitrage and these technology examples is that MrBeast operates in both directions simultaneously. He receives outsized perception in the YouTuber category because his capabilities belong to the conglomerate category. But he also receives outsized perception in the conglomerate category because his origin story belongs to the YouTuber category. Investors who value Beast Industries at $5 billion are, in part, pricing the narrative. A conglomerate built by a YouTuber from scratch, starting in a bedroom in North Carolina, is a more compelling investment narrative than a conglomerate built by experienced consumer products executives using conventional methods. The narrative itself has value, and the narrative's value is a product of the categorical arbitrage. This framework also explains something about the relationship between MrBeast and the platforms he operates on. YouTube, as a platform, benefits from the miscontextualization of its largest creators. When the public thinks of YouTube as a place where individuals create content and build audiences through talent and persistence, the platform's mythology is reinforced. The American Dream narrative, applied to the creator economy, serves YouTube's marketing interests. It attracts more creators, which generates more content, which attracts more viewers, which generates more advertising revenue. If the public understood that YouTube's largest creator is actually a $5 billion conglomerate operating at industrial scale, the mythology would collapse. The platform would be revealed as what it is, a distribution channel that disproportionately rewards capital-intensive operations, just like every other media distribution channel in history. The miscontextualization, therefore, is not just MrBeast's advantage, it is the platform's advantage. Both benefit from the illusion that what is happening is individual creativity rather than corporate media production. And this brings us to a deeper structural point about the nature of platforms themselves. Platforms are, at their core, systems that enable transactions between two sides of a market. YouTube enables transactions between creators and viewers, mediated by advertising. The platform's revenue model depends on both sides believing that the system is fair, that talent and effort are the primary determinants of success, and that the playing field, if not level, is at least theoretically navigable. The existence of MrBeast, who is both the platform's greatest success story and its greatest structural contradiction, creates a fascinating tension. He is the proof that anyone can make it on YouTube, and the proof that making it on YouTube requires hundreds of millions of dollars in venture capital, a C-suite executive team, and production budgets that rival those of television networks. Both of these things are true simultaneously, and the ability to hold both in suspension, to see the YouTuber and the conglomerate at the same time without resolving the contradiction, is what the miscontextualization engine makes possible. Now, the reason I am spending an entire section on this framework is that it is essential for understanding the second half of this essay's argument, which concerns NASA and the entry of institutional actors into the spectacle economy. Because the miscontextualization engine operates in reverse when institutions adopt the formats and strategies of individual creators. When NASA produces Meet the Astronaut videos formatted identically to influencer introduction content, when it streams its mission on YouTube with the same multi-platform distribution strategy that a major creator would use, when it generates 17 million concurrent viewers through the same thumbnail and title optimization techniques that drive click-through rates on entertainment content, it is entering a category, individual creator content, in which it appears to be a scrappy underdog rather than a federal agency with a budget of over $25 billion per year. The institutional version of miscontextualization creates the opposite perception from the creator version, where MrBeast appears more extraordinary because he is seen as a YouTuber rather than a conglomerate. NASA appears more relatable, more accessible, more human because it is seen as a content creator rather than a government bureaucracy. The YouTube format softens the institutional frame. The Meet the Astronaut video makes a highly trained military pilot and engineer seem like a person you might follow on social media. The live stream makes a $23 billion rocket look like something you are watching with the same casual engagement you bring to a gaming stream. The spectacle of the moon mission is real, but it is being delivered through a medium that inherently domesticates it, that makes it feel like content rather than history. Both directions of the miscontextualization engine, whether it is an individual appearing institutional or an institution appearing individual, produce the same fundamental outcome. They generate a perception gap. And in the spectacle economy, perception gaps are attention. Attention is engagement. Engagement is value. And value, whether measured in subscriber counts, advertising revenue, political capital, or public support for a $25 billion annual budget, is the currency that the entire system runs on. The question that remains, and that the rest of this essay will attempt to answer, is what happens when this engine runs at full capacity across every domain of public life simultaneously? When government agencies, corporations, media companies, and individual creators are all operating the miscontextualization engine, all generating perception gaps, all competing for the same finite pool of human attention, using the same spectacle-driven strategies, What kind of information environment does that produce? And what does it mean for the public's ability to understand the systems that actually govern their lives? In September of 2021, a South Korean television series called Squid Game premiered on Netflix and became, almost overnight, the most watched show in the platform's history. The premise was simple, in the way that the most resonant cultural products are always simple. A group of financially desperate people agree to participate in a series of children's games, and those who lose are killed. The show was brutal, colorful, and structurally elegant. It was also, and this is the part that matters for our analysis, a product of Netflix's specific strategy of acquiring and distributing non-English language content to global audiences, using its algorithmic recommendation system to bridge cultural and linguistic barriers that traditional media distribution could not cross. This is important. Squid Game was not an American show. It was a Korean show created by Hwang Dong-hyuk, produced in Korean, set in Korea, and drawing on specifically Korean cultural anxieties about debt, class, and the cruelty of economic competition. But Netflix's platform made it legible to American and global audiences in a way that no previous distribution mechanism could have. The subtitles, the dubbing, the algorithmic surfacing to viewers who had previously watched other international content or thematically similar shows, all of this was Netflix's infrastructure doing what it was designed to do, collapsing the distance between markets, making foreign content feel accessible, and capturing the attention of audiences who would never have encountered the show through traditional distribution channels. Within weeks of its premiere, Squid Game had been watched by over 111 million member accounts, a number that Netflix claimed made it the most popular series launch in the platform's history. The cultural penetration was total. The show's imagery, the masked guards, the children's games rendered in deadly contexts, the green tracksuits became instantly recognizable memes, costumes, and reference points. It was the kind of cultural saturation that typically only Hollywood blockbusters achieve, but it achieved it through a platform rather than through theatrical distribution. And then MrBeast made his video. $456,000 Squid Game in real life, posted in November 2021, recreated the show's games with real contestants competing for real money. The video cost an estimated $3.5 million to produce. The set was built to replicate the show's iconic visual design. The games were faithful recreations, the prize money was real, and the video generated 631 million views, making it one of the most watched non-music videos in YouTube history. As of 2026, it has accumulated over 917 million views. The standard analysis of this video frames it as a brilliant piece of trend-jacking. MrBeast saw what was popular and capitalized on it. That analysis is not wrong, but it is shallow. What actually happened was something far more structurally interesting. What happened was a three-stage process of audience aggregation that reveals the deep mechanics of how attention flows between platforms and between media formats in the contemporary ecosystem. Stage 1. Netflix's infrastructure collapsed the distance between Korean content and global audiences, creating a massive pool of viewers who were emotionally invested in a specific narrative, aesthetic, and set of game mechanics. These viewers were primed. They had already consumed the show's premise. They had already internalized its visual language. They were, in marketing terms, a pre-qualified audience. Stage 2. MrBeast's video offered those pre-qualified viewers something the Netflix show could not: the elimination of fiction. Squid Game was a scripted drama. Its power derived from the viewer's imaginative engagement with fictional consequences. But everyone watching knew that the actors were not actually dying. The fiction was the frame, and the frame contained the experience. MrBeast's video removed the frame. It said, "These games are real, this money is real, these people are really competing." The consequences, while not lethal, were real in the economic sense. Someone was actually going to win $456,000. This removal of the fictional frame did not replicate the show's experience. It extended it into a domain that the show, by its nature as fiction, could not occupy. Stage 3. This extension redirected attention from Netflix's platform to YouTube. Viewers who had watched Squid Game on Netflix and wanted more of that experience. Viewers who were searching for Squid Game-related content. Viewers who were in the algorithmic orbit of Squid Game recommendations. All of these viewers were now potential viewers of MrBeast's video. He was not just capitalizing on a trend. He was redirecting an audience that Netflix had assembled, using the cultural work that Netflix had done, and converting that redirected attention into views, subscribers, and revenue on his own platform. The cost of assembling that audience, the production cost of Squid Game, the marketing spend, the algorithmic refinement, all of that was Netflix's investment. MrBeast extracted the return. This is not parasitism in the biological sense, because Netflix was not harmed by the process. If anything, the viral success of MrBeast's video further amplified interest in the original show. But it is a form of what economists call value capture without value creation. MrBeast did not create the cultural phenomenon. He built an on-ramp that allowed the cultural phenomenon's audience to flow onto his platform, and the on-ramp was made of spectacle. There is a concept operating here that has no name in existing media theory, so let me give it one: emotional frequency extraction. Every piece of successful content resonates at a specific emotional frequency, a particular combination of feelings, anxieties, desires, and curiosities that the content activates in the viewer. Squid Game resonated at the frequency of competition, anxiety, blended with class, resentment, blended with the morbid fascination of watching consequences play out. Netflix spent hundreds of millions of dollars, not just on the show itself, but on the platform infrastructure, the recommendation algorithms, the localization systems that allowed this specific emotional frequency to propagate globally. That investment created something enormously valuable, a global population that had been tuned to a specific emotional frequency and was now seeking more content that resonated at that frequency. MrBeast's video extracted the frequency without bearing the cost of discovering it. He did not need to research what emotional combination would resonate with global audiences. Netflix had already done that research at enormous expense through years of data collection and algorithmic refinement. He did not need to build the platform infrastructure to distribute content at that frequency. Netflix had already built it, and in doing so, had primed the audience to seek similar content on other platforms. All he needed to do was produce a piece of content that resonated at the same frequency and place it on the platform, YouTube, where the primed audience would inevitably go looking for more. The emotional frequency was the real product. Netflix discovered it, MrBeast extracted it, and the extraction cost a fraction of the discovery. This pattern, emotional frequency extraction, is not limited to the Squid Game case. It is a structural feature of the multi-platform media ecosystem. Whenever one platform invests heavily in discovering and propagating an emotional frequency, other platforms and creators can extract that frequency at minimal cost. When a political event generates outrage, the emotional frequency of outrage has been discovered by the event itself, and YouTube commentators extract it by producing reaction content. When a celebrity scandal generates fascination, the emotional frequency of scandal fascination has been discovered by the media coverage, and TikTok creators extract it. The entity that bears the cost of discovery, whether it is Netflix funding a show, a news organization covering an event, or a government agency launching a mission, rarely captures the full value of the emotional frequency it generates. The value leaks across platforms, across creators, across the entire attention marketplace. And the entities that are most skilled at extraction, at producing content that resonates at a discovered frequency without bearing the discovery cost, are the entities that generate the highest returns in the spectacle economy. MrBeast is, by this measure, the most efficient emotional frequency extractor in the history of digital media. Now, here is where the analysis gets deeper and more uncomfortable. Squid Game, the original show, succeeded not just because of its visual style or its game mechanics, but because it tapped into a specific anxiety that exists at a near universal level in contemporary capitalist societies. The anxiety that life itself has become a game, that the economic system operates with the logic of a competition in which there are winners and losers, and that the consequences of losing are severe, possibly fatal in the social, if not the biological sense. This anxiety is not new. It has been a feature of popular culture for decades. The Hunger Games franchise, Suzanne Collins' novels and their film adaptations, depicted a society in which young people are forced to fight to the death for the entertainment of a wealthy elite. The Maze Runner depicted adolescents trapped in a lethal experimental environment. The Purge imagined an America in which all crime, including murder, is legal for one night a year. Battle Royale, the Japanese film and novel that predated The Hunger Games by over a decade, depicted schoolchildren forced to kill each other on a deserted island. These are not isolated creative choices. They are expressions of a shared cultural unconscious, a collective processing of what it feels like to live inside a system that distributes rewards and punishments with the arbitrary logic of a game. And here is the connection to MrBeast that most commentators miss. MrBeast's content is not a departure from this genre. It is its real-world instantiation. When he creates a video titled $10,000 every day you survive in a grocery store, or last to leave the circle, and wins $200,000, or survive 100 days in a circle, he is producing content whose structure is identical to the dystopian competition narratives that populate fiction. The key difference is that it is not fiction. It is reality. People are actually competing. Money is actually at stake. The challenges, while not lethal, are genuinely demanding, and the audience is watching not with the distance of fictional engagement, but with the proximity of reality television engagement, the knowledge that what they are seeing is, at some level, really happening. This collapse of the distance between fictional dystopia and real-world entertainment is one of the most significant and least discussed features of the contemporary media landscape. In the fictional versions, the point is critique. Collins wrote The Hunger Games as a satire of media culture, spectacle politics, and economic inequality. The viewer is supposed to feel uncomfortable. They are supposed to recognize the horror of a system that entertains itself by watching people suffer. But in the MrBeast version, the critique has been dissolved, the horror has been replaced by excitement, the discomfort has been replaced by engagement. The spectacle is the same, people competing for life-changing sums of money under extreme conditions, but the frame has shifted from critique to entertainment. What was once a warning has become the thing it was warning about. This is not MrBeast's fault. He did not create the cultural conditions that make this content appealing. He identified them and built content that serves them. The demand for competition spectacle entertainment, for watching real people face real consequences in controlled environments, is a demand that exists independently of any individual creator. It is a demand that is generated by the same economic system that Squid Game critiques, a system in which economic insecurity is widespread, in which the gap between winning and losing feels increasingly stark, and in which the public, unable to affect the system's operation, finds catharsis in watching its logic play out in controlled, entertaining, and ultimately safe formats. The board games tell the same story. Monopoly, designed in the early 20th century, literalizes the dynamics of capitalist competition, property acquisition, rent extraction, bankruptcy, and the zero-sum distribution of wealth. The game of life reduces an entire human existence to a series of binary choices with financial consequences. These are not just games, they are cultural artifacts that reveal what the society that produced them understands about itself. They are the means through which the gamified nature of economic life is made legible to people who may never articulate it in political or economic terms, but who absorb it through play. MrBeast's content operates in the same register. It does not explain capitalism. It performs capitalism. It stages the competition, distributes the rewards, and allows the audience to participate vicariously in the game. And this is where the connection to Netflix's strategy becomes more than just a case study in trend jacking. Netflix's investment in Squid Game was an investment in the global distribution of a particular emotional frequency, the frequency of competition anxiety. Netflix did not create that anxiety. It identified it, packaged it, and distributed it globally using its platform's infrastructure. MrBeast did not create it either. He identified it, removed the fictional frame, and distributed the raw experience of it on YouTube. Both are working with the same raw material. Both are, in different ways, monetizing the same underlying cultural condition. The difference is that Netflix produces the critique and MrBeast produces the experience. And in the spectacle economy, the experience always wins. But there is a hidden economic layer beneath this cultural analysis that reveals something even more structurally significant. Netflix's strategy of acquiring and distributing non-English language content was not primarily a cultural decision. It was an arbitrage operation. The cost of producing high-quality television content in South Korea, in India, in Spain, in Nigeria, is a fraction of the cost of producing equivalent content in Hollywood. Korean drama production costs are estimated at roughly 1/10 to 1/5 of comparable American productions. This means that Netflix could acquire a show like Squid Game, which had the production quality and narrative sophistication to compete with any American prestige drama, at a cost that was radically lower than producing something equivalent in Los Angeles. The cultural accessibility problem, the fact that American audiences historically resisted non-English content, was solved by the platform's infrastructure, subtitles, dubbing, and most importantly, the recommendation algorithm, which could identify viewers whose watch history suggested openness to international content and surface the show to them specifically. This is a content production arbitrage that mirrors the labor arbitrage in manufacturing. Move production to lower-cost markets, use technology to make the product legible to higher-cost markets, and capture the margin. Netflix applied this logic to storytelling, and Squid Game was its most spectacular success. But here's the point. When MrBeast extracted the emotional frequency from Squid Game and converted it into a YouTube video, he was extracting not just from the show, but from the entire arbitrage structure beneath it. The Korean writers, directors, actors, and crew who created the original work, at Korean labor costs, generated a cultural product whose emotional frequency was then propagated globally by Netflix's infrastructure and then extracted by MrBeast at the cost of a single video production. The value chain runs from Korean creative labor to Netflix's algorithmic distribution to MrBeast's spectacle recreation to the viewer's nervous system. And at each stage, the entity closest to the viewer captures a disproportionate share of the value, while the entities closest to the creative labor capture less. This is the same structural dynamic that governs global supply chains in manufacturing. The brand captures more value than the factory, and the factory captures more value than the workers. There is also a process operating here that I want to name precisely because it has implications far beyond this specific case. Call it critique dissolution. Squid Game, the original, was a work of social criticism. It used the mechanism of a deadly competition to critique economic inequality, the dehumanization of debt, and the moral corruption of a system that treats human lives as stakes in a game. The critique was the point. The show was designed to make the viewer uncomfortable, to force them to confront the relationship between their entertainment and the real-world conditions it allegorized. But when the show's format was extracted and reproduced as a MrBeast video, the critique dissolved. What remained was the format, the games, the competition, the spectacle, stripped of its critical intent. The audience received the excitement without the discomfort, the spectacle without the meaning, the form without the content. Critique dissolution is not a failure of MrBeast's creative process. It is a structural feature of the spectacle economy. The spectacle economy cannot metabolize critique. Critique requires cognitive engagement, interpretive work, the maintenance of an ironic distance between the viewer and the spectacle. These are precisely the cognitive behaviors that the spectacle economy's interface discourages. The scroll rewards immediacy, not reflection. The algorithm rewards engagement, not interpretation. The thumbnail rewards curiosity, not critical thought. And so critique, when it enters the spectacle economy's pipeline, is progressively stripped away. What emerges at the other end is pure spectacle, shorn of meaning, optimized for engagement, and structurally identical to every other piece of spectacle in the attention marketplace. A work of art becomes a format becomes a template becomes content. And content, in the spectacle economy, is a commodity, because the experience does not require interpretation. It does not require the viewer to hold a satirical distance from what they are watching. It does not require them to process the social commentary or recognize the parallels to their own economic circumstances. It requires only that they feel the excitement of the competition, the vicarious thrill of watching someone win or lose something consequential, and the satisfaction of resolution. This is spectacle in its purest form, emotional engagement without cognitive processing. And it is the form of engagement that the algorithm rewards most heavily, because it produces the longest watch times, the highest completion rates, and the most shares. The pipeline, then, runs from Korean cultural production to Netflix's global distribution to MrBeast's real-world recreation to the viewer's emotional experience. Each stage strips away a layer of complexity. The original Squid Game was dense with social commentary, character development, and cultural specificity. Netflix's distribution preserved much of this, but added a layer of accessibility. MrBeast's recreation preserved the games and the prizes, but stripped away the narrative, the characters, and the critique. And the viewer's experience preserved the excitement, but stripped away everything else. By the time the cultural product reaches its final form, a feeling in a viewer's nervous system, it has been compressed from a multi-layered work of social criticism into a pure unit of spectacle. This compression is not incidental to the process. It is the process. And it is happening not just with Squid Game content, but with every form of information that passes through the spectacle economy's pipeline. News, science, policy, history, all of it is being compressed, stage by stage, from complex reality into consumable spectacle. And with each stage of compression, something is lost. The question is whether what is lost matters. And the answer, which we will explore in subsequent sections, is that it matters more than most people can imagine. There is a number that explains everything about the structural transformation occurring beneath the surface of the creator economy, and it is this. In 2024, Feastables, MrBeast's chocolate brand, generated $250 million in sales and over $20 million in profit. In the same year, his media operation, the YouTube channel and the Amazon Prime reality series Beast Games combined, generated comparable revenue but lost nearly $80 million. The chocolate made more money than the most watched YouTube channel in history. The candy bar was more profitable than 117 billion lifetime views. This inversion is not a curiosity. It is a structural revelation. It tells you something fundamental about where value actually resides in the spectacle economy, and it tells you something that the popular narrative about the creator economy systematically obscures. The popular narrative says that creators make money from content, that views generate advertising revenue, that the path to wealth in the creator economy runs through the platform, through watch time, through subscribers, through the algorithmic reward system. This narrative is not false. MrBeast does generate substantial advertising revenue. Forbes estimated his YouTube earnings at $85 million for the period from April 2024 to April 2025. But the narrative is misleading in the same way that saying a farmer makes money from growing crops is misleading. The farmer does grow crops, but the farmer who owns the supply chain, who processes the crops, who brands and distributes the finished product, makes far more than the farmer who just grows. MrBeast is not a farmer. He is the supply chain. And the supply chain starts with attention and ends with equity. Here is how the alchemy works. YouTube, as a platform, is an attention marketplace. Creators produce content that captures viewer attention. Advertisers pay to access that attention. The platform takes approximately 45% of the advertising revenue and passes the remaining 55% to the creator. This is the basic economic engine of the creator economy, and for most creators, it is the only engine. Their income is a function of their views, their CPM, which is the cost per 1,000 impressions that advertisers are willing to pay, and their share of the advertising revenue. They are, in the economic language, pure content producers. Their revenue scales linearly with their output and their viewership. MrBeast operates this engine, but it is the least important of his revenue sources. What he has built is a mechanism for converting the attention generated by his content into something far more valuable: brand equity. When 476 million people subscribe to your channel, when your videos generate billions of views per month, you do not just have an advertising business, you have a distribution network. And a distribution network of that scale, if it can be directed toward the sale of physical products, is worth more than any amount of advertising revenue. Feastables launched in January 2022. The initial fundraise was $5 million at a $50 million valuation. In its first year, the brand generated $33 million in sales. In 2023, sales reached $96 million, a growth rate of 191%. In 2024, sales reached $250 million. The brand is now available in over 30,000 retail locations, including Walmart, Target, and 7-Eleven across the United States, Canada, and Mexico. It has expanded into Asian markets, with retail partnerships launching across Japan, South Korea, and Singapore. And it achieved all of this with something that no traditional consumer packaged goods brand can replicate: zero advertising spend. Zero. No television commercials, no print ads, no digital marketing campaigns, no paid influencer partnerships, no cost per acquisition. When Hershey's or Mars launches a new product, they allocate 10 to 15% of revenue to advertising. For a product generating $250 million in sales, that would be $25 to $37 million spent on telling people the product exists. Feastables spends nothing, because its founder has 476 million subscribers who actively seek out his content. Every video is a commercial, every thumbnail is a product placement, every moment of viewer attention is a marketing impression that cost exactly nothing at the margin to generate. This is not a new concept. The idea of vertical integration, of using media ownership to promote commercial products, is as old as media itself. William Randolph Hearst used his newspaper empire to promote his political interests and commercial ventures. Disney uses its film and television properties to drive merchandise sales, theme park attendance, and streaming subscriptions. What is new about MrBeast's model is the directness and efficiency of the conversion. In the Disney model, the path from content to commerce runs through multiple intermediaries: theatrical distribution, merchandise licensing, retail partnerships, each taking a margin. In the MrBeast model, the path runs directly from the YouTube algorithm to the viewer's screen to the Walmart shelf. There are fewer intermediaries, the conversion is faster. And the cost of customer acquisition, the metric that governs the economics of every consumer brand in existence, approaches zero. The implications of this for traditional consumer brands are severe. If you are Hershey's and you are competing against Feastables on the same Walmart shelf, you are competing against a product whose marketing cost is a fraction of yours. Your product may be better, your brand may have more history, your distribution may be more extensive, but your cost structure is fundamentally different. You're paying for attention, they are generating it for free. And in a commodity market like chocolate, where the products are largely interchangeable, from the consumer's perspective, the company with the lower customer acquisition cost has a structural advantage that is almost impossible to overcome. There is a strategic detail within the Feastables launch that reveals the depth of Donaldson's understanding of consumer behavior, and that contradicts the conventional wisdom of the creator economy. When most YouTubers or influencers launch a product, they sell it direct to consumer through their own website. The logic is straightforward. Direct-to-consumer maximizes per-unit margins by eliminating the retailer's cut. You control the customer relationship, you own the data, you capture the full value of each transaction. This is the playbook that has been taught in every creator economy course and every influencer marketing handbook for the past decade. Donaldson rejected it entirely. He launched Feastables through Walmart, not through his website, not through an online store, through the largest physical retailer in the world. The margins were lower, the complexity was higher, the regulatory requirements were more demanding. And it was, in retrospect, the single most important strategic decision in the history of the creator economy. Because Donaldson understood something about chocolate that the direct-to-consumer playbook does not account for. Chocolate is an impulse purchase. People do not go online and order chocolate bars for delivery. They see chocolate bars on a shelf while they are buying groceries, and they pick one up. The purchase decision happens in seconds, in a physical environment driven by visual recognition and brand familiarity. By placing Feastables on Walmart shelves next to Hershey's and Reese's and Snickers, Donaldson was inserting his product into the exact behavioral context where chocolate purchases occur. His audience, 476 million subscribers, provided the brand recognition. Walmart provided the purchase context. The combination was devastating to incumbents. And then there is Beast Games, the Amazon Prime Video reality competition series. Amazon reportedly committed $100 million to produce the first season, which the company said was its most watched unscripted series ever. But here is the hidden economics. Donaldson has publicly stated that he lost money on the production because he spent more than Amazon's budget, pouring his own capital into prize money and production value that exceeded what the deal covered. This seems irrational from a traditional media perspective. Why would a producer spend more than their production budget? The answer is that the show was never the product. The show was the loss leader. Beast Games was not designed to generate production profit. It was designed to extend MrBeast's brand beyond YouTube, to introduce his persona and format to the massive audience of Amazon Prime subscribers who may never have encountered his YouTube channel, and to generate the kind of institutional credibility, the association with a major streaming platform, that elevates his brand from internet creator to entertainment property. The Amazon deal was a marketing expense disguised as a content deal. And the return on that marketing expense was not measured in production profit, but in the brand equity that accrues to every other business in the Beast Industries portfolio. This logic, spending more than you earn on the media side to generate brand equity that is monetized on the commerce side, is the same logic that drives the YouTube channel's $80 million annual loss. Every video that costs $5 million to produce and generates $3 million in advertising revenue is, in isolation, a money-losing proposition. But it is not in isolation, it is part of a system. And the system generates $900 million in total revenue and is valued at $5 billion. The individual video is not the unit of analysis. The system is the unit of analysis. And this is precisely the category error that the miscontextualization engine creates. The audience sees individual videos and individual products, not the system that connects them. There is also a remarkable personal finance dimension to this story that deserves attention. Donaldson has publicly stated that he often has less than $1 million in personal funds. He has said that he borrowed money from his mother to cover his wedding costs. His estimated net worth of $2.6 billion is almost entirely composed of equity in Beast Industries, not cash. He is, in a very literal sense, a billionaire who cannot buy a house without taking a loan. This is not an affectation. It is the structural consequence of his reinvestment strategy. Every dollar of revenue is cycled back into content production and business expansion. There is no extraction. There is no personal luxury consumption. There is only the flywheel. Attention generates revenue. Revenue funds spectacle. Spectacle generates attention. Attention builds brand equity. Brand equity attracts investment. Investment funds expansion. Expansion generates more revenue. He is not living off the flywheel. He is living inside it. This personal austerity amid institutional wealth creates another layer of the miscontextualization. When the public sees a man who gives away millions of dollars in every video and who is worth $2.6 billion but who has no cash, the cognitive dissonance is itself a form of spectacle. It does not compute. It violates every assumption about what wealth means and how wealthy people behave. And because it does not compute, it generates discourse. Is he really broke? Is he lying? Is he a genius? Or is he irresponsible? The discourse, as we will discuss in Section 9, is the distribution. The paradox is the marketing. The incomprehensibility is the brand. Now scale this logic beyond chocolate. Beast Industries investor documents reveal plans to expand into beverages, cereal, wellness products, and snack categories. Each of these is a market in which the same structural advantage, zero customer acquisition cost, applies. Each is a market in which MrBeast's distribution network provides a built-in audience of hundreds of millions. And each is a market in which the incumbents, the Nestle's and PepsiCo's and Kellogg's of the world, are carrying marketing cost structures that the MrBeast model renders obsolete, but the ambition extends beyond consumer packaged goods. In September 2025, Beast Industries launched Beast Mobile, a mobile phone service. In October 2025, it trademarked MrBeast Financial, a fintech initiative encompassing online banking, credit and debit cards, microfinancing, cryptocurrency payments, investment management, and financial literacy tools. In February 2026, it acquired Step, a fintech platform with over 7 million users, backed by Evolve Bank and Trust. The acquisition gives Beast Industries a banking license, a user base, and the infrastructure to offer commission-free stock trading, cashback, loans, and savings accounts. This is not a YouTuber launching a side business. This is a holding company executing a diversification strategy that spans consumer products, financial services, media production, and software. It is the same pattern you see in conglomerates like Berkshire Hathaway, or more aptly, in the platform-to-commerce strategies of companies like Amazon, which used its e-commerce dominance to launch Amazon Web Services, Amazon Prime Video, and a financial services ecosystem. The logic is identical. Use a dominant position in one market, in this case attention, to enter adjacent markets at a structural cost advantage. The $5 billion valuation, which Beast Industries is seeking in its current fundraising round, reflects this logic. Investors are not paying $5 billion for a YouTube channel. They are paying for the distribution network, the audience data, the brand equity, and the zero CAC consumer product machine. They are betting that the attention to equity conversion can be replicated across multiple product categories and multiple markets. And based on the trajectory of Feastables, which went from 0 to 250 million in 3 years, the bet is not unreasonable. But there is a deeper layer to this analysis that connects back to the spectacle thesis. The attention that powers this entire machine is generated through spectacle. The $3 to $5 million videos, the reality competition formats, the escalating challenges, all of this is the fuel that keeps the attention engine running. And the attention engine, in turn, is what makes the consumer products machine viable, which means that Beast Industries' entire economic model is, at its foundation, dependent on the continued escalation of spectacle. This creates a fascinating structural tension. The spectacle gradient, as we discussed in Section 3, demands ever-increasing investment in content production. Each video must be more spectacular than the last. The budgets must grow. The challenges must escalate. The stakes must rise. And this escalation is what generates the $80 million annual loss on the media side of the business. The media operation is not profitable. It is a loss leader. It is the cost of maintaining the attention engine that powers the profitable consumer products operation. This is a model that traditional media companies would recognize. Network television has always operated on the principle that the content exists to deliver audiences to advertisers. The content itself does not need to be profitable. It needs to generate attention, and the attention is monetized elsewhere. But MrBeast's version is more extreme than anything traditional media has attempted. He is not just delivering audiences to advertisers. He is delivering audiences to his own product lines. He is both the network and the brand. The content is the loss leader, and the consumer products are the margin. And because he controls both sides of the equation, the efficiency of the conversion is higher than anything the traditional media-to-commerce pipeline can produce. The question that investors are implicitly answering when they value Beast Industries at $5 billion is whether this model is sustainable, whether the spectacle gradient can continue to escalate without breaking, whether the audience will continue to grow, or whether it will plateau, desensitize, or fragment, whether the attention to equity conversion can work in categories beyond chocolate, whether a man who built his empire on the premise of giving away money can maintain that premise while simultaneously building a financial services company that is by definition designed to accumulate money. The Lunchley case study is instructive here because it reveals both the power and the fragility of the attention to commerce model. Lunchley, a prepackaged meal product launched in partnership with Logan Paul and KSI, was designed to challenge Lunchables, the Kraft Heinz product that has dominated the category for decades. The launch leveraged the combined audiences of 3 of the largest creators in the world. The zero KC advantage was multiplied threefold. The product reached retail shelves almost immediately. And then the discourse engine, the same mechanism that distributes MrBeast's content through controversy, turned against the product. Nutrition advocates pointed out that the sodium content was comparable to the product it claimed to be healthier than. TikTok users posted videos showing apparent mold in the packaging, and those videos generated 8 million views. The spectacle economy's self-amplifying discourse loop, which usually distributes MrBeast's content by generating debate, was now distributing criticism of his product by the same mechanism. The controversy was the marketing, but this time it was marketing against the product. This reveals a structural vulnerability in the attention to commerce model that no one in the creator economy has adequately addressed. The zero CAC advantage works in one direction only. When attention flows toward the product through positive spectacle, the customer acquisition cost is 0. But when attention flows toward the product through negative spectacle, the damage acquisition cost is also 0. The same distribution network that drives sales at no cost can drive criticism at no cost. The same algorithmic amplification that surfaces positive content about the brand surfaces negative content with equal efficiency. The discourse engine is neutral. It amplifies engagement regardless of sentiment. And this means that the attention to commerce model carries a specific form of risk that traditional CPG brands do not face: reputational contagion at algorithmic speed. When a traditional brand faces a quality issue, the information propagates through news coverage, regulatory channels, and word of mouth, all of which are relatively slow. When a creator brand faces a quality issue, the information propagates through the same algorithmic attention marketplace that built the brand at the same speed and with the same amplification. The weapon becomes the vulnerability. This risk is compounded by the fact that Beast Industries is now expanding into financial services, a domain where trust is the fundamental product. When MrBeast Financial offers banking, lending, and investment services to an audience that is predominantly young and financially unsophisticated, the reputational stakes escalate by orders of magnitude. A mold issue in a meal kit is a public relations problem, a failure in a financial product, a data breach, a lending practice that harms consumers, a compliance violation, is a regulatory and legal crisis that could propagate through the same algorithmic discourse network at the same speed, with consequences that extend beyond brand damage into consumer harm. The very infrastructure that makes the attention to commerce model so powerful also makes it maximally fragile when the attention turns hostile. These are not easy questions, but they are the right questions, and they are questions that the spectacle economy's own logic tends to suppress, because asking them requires the kind of deep structural analysis that does not compress well into thumbnails, which is in itself a manifestation of the very problem we are describing. On April 6th, 2026, 6 days into the Artemis II mission, the Orion spacecraft passed behind the moon and entered a 40-minute communications blackout. For 40 minutes, 4 human beings were more isolated from the rest of humanity than any people in history. The spacecraft, traveling at over 60,000 miles per hour relative to Earth, was shielded from all radio contact by the bulk of the moon itself. The Deep Space Network, NASA's global array of radio antennas designed to maintain communication with spacecraft across the solar system, could not reach them. Mission Control in Houston could not reach them. For 40 minutes, Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Jeremy Hansen were alone with the universe in a way that no human being had been since the crew of Apollo 17 in 1972. When Orion re-emerged from behind the moon, the spacecraft's cameras captured an Earthrise, the second time in human history that human eyes had directly witnessed the Earth rising above the lunar horizon. The crew had also observed the far side of the moon, features of the lunar surface that no human being had ever seen directly. They had witnessed a total solar eclipse from lunar orbit, watching the sun disappear behind the darkened moon while the solar corona, the sun's outermost atmosphere, glowed around the lunar edge. They had set a new record for the farthest distance from Earth ever traveled by human beings, surpassing the Apollo 13 record of 248,655 miles, with a maximum distance of 252,756 miles. This is, by any measure, one of the most significant achievements in the history of human exploration. The first crewed mission beyond low Earth orbit in over half a century. A test flight for the spacecraft and systems that will eventually carry humans back to the lunar surface and eventually to Mars. An engineering triumph that required the coordinated effort of thousands of people across multiple countries and decades of development. The Space Launch System rocket alone cost over $23 billion to develop. The Orion spacecraft cost another $21 billion. The mission was the culmination of a program that spans multiple presidential administrations, budget cycles, and political priorities. And how was this achievement communicated to the public? Through YouTube, through live streams, through astronaut profile shorts and meet the crew videos, through a zero-gravity mascot design contest, through multi-platform distribution across YouTube, NASA Plus, Amazon Prime, Apple TV, Hulu, Netflix, HBO Max, Roku, and Twitch. Through daily mission status briefings formatted for social media consumption, through a content calendar that planned media moments the way a television network plans Sweeps Week. NASA's YouTube channel, with approximately 13.6 million subscribers, served as the primary hub for mission coverage. The launch broadcast attracted over 17 million viewers across all platforms, with the YouTube stream alone peaking at nearly 4 million concurrent viewers. This made the Artemis II launch the most watched event in NASA history and one of the largest live-streamed events ever recorded, surpassing the viewership records of the 2020 SpaceX Crew Dragon Demo 2 flight, Major League of Legends World Championships, and several international sporting events. NASA's coverage strategy included 24/7 live coverage on YouTube, a separate live stream of views from the Orion spacecraft, daily briefings, crew downlink events where the astronauts communicated live with the public, and the systematic release of photographs and video through a curated multimedia resource page. Now, there is nothing inherently wrong with a government agency using modern media platforms to communicate its work to the public. Transparency, accessibility, and public engagement are legitimate goals. NASA has a mandate to inspire public interest in space exploration, and using the platforms where the public actually spends its time is a rational strategy for fulfilling that mandate. The problem, or rather the phenomenon that requires analysis, is not that NASA is on YouTube. It is that being on YouTube imposes a specific set of structural constraints on how information is communicated, constraints that transform the nature of the communication itself. YouTube is a spectacle economy platform. Its algorithm rewards content that generates high click-through rates, long watch times, and strong engagement signals. Content that performs well on YouTube is content that has been optimized for these metrics. This means that any organization operating on YouTube, whether it is a 27-year-old content creator or a federal agency with a $25 billion annual budget, is subject to the same incentive structure. The content must be engaging. It must hold attention. It must compete not just with other space content, but with every other piece of content on the platform, from MrBeast challenges to cooking tutorials to music videos. The algorithm does not grade on a curve. A NASA livestream that fails to retain viewers is suppressed, the same way a MrBeast video that fails to retain viewers is suppressed. This structural incentive pushes NASA toward the same strategies that every other successful YouTube operation employs: thumbnail optimization, title engineering, narrative pacing, emotional arc construction. The Meet the Astronaut videos are not just informational profiles. They are formatted identically to the influencer introduction videos that populate the platform. They are designed to create a personal connection between the viewer and the astronaut, to make the viewer feel that they know this person, that they are invested in their success. This is not science communication. It is audience building, and it works. But it works by shifting the frame from institutional achievement to personal narrative, from collective engineering triumph to individual human story. Consider what this frame shift does to the public's understanding of the mission. When the audience watches a Meet the Astronaut video and learns that Reed Wiseman is a former Navy test pilot, and that his wife passed away, and that a lunar crater was named in her honor, they feel something. They connect emotionally. They become invested in the mission as a human story. And this emotional investment is what drives the engagement metrics, the watch time, the comments, the shares that the algorithm rewards. But this emotional investment comes at a cost. The cost is that the audience's understanding of the mission is organized around the personal rather than the structural. They know the astronauts' names and stories. They may not know what AV code is, or why the heat shield controversy delayed the mission by over a year, or what the Lunar Gateway program was before it was canceled in March 2026, or why the program was canceled, or what the cancellation means for the long-term trajectory of human space exploration. And there are layers beneath even these layers that the spectacle format renders completely invisible. The crew selection itself is a political document. Victor Glover is the first person of color to travel beyond low Earth orbit. Christina Koch is the first woman to travel beyond low Earth orbit. Jeremy Hansen is the first Canadian to travel beyond low Earth orbit. These selections are historically significant, and they are communicated in the spectacle economy as inspirational narratives. The first woman, the first person of color, the first Canadian. But the deeper structural reality beneath these selections is that they represent specific political negotiations between NASA and the Canadian Space Agency, specific commitments made during the establishment of the Artemis program regarding international partnership and diversity, and specific calculations about the political constituencies that the program must maintain to secure continued funding. The inclusion of a Canadian astronaut is not merely a gesture of international cooperation. It is part of a formal agreement under which Canada contributed the Canadarm3 robotic system to the now-cancelled Lunar Gateway in exchange for flight opportunities for Canadian astronauts. The cancellation of the Lunar Gateway in March 2026, which occurred while Artemis II was in its final preparations, raises profound questions about the future of these international commitments that the spectacle of the mission itself renders invisible. Similarly, the heat shield controversy that delayed the mission tells a story about institutional risk management that is far more consequential than the spectacle communicates. The AV coat heat shield material, which has been used since the Apollo era, exhibited unexpected behavior during the Artemis I uncrewed test flight, with material eroding in patterns that engineers did not predict. This created a genuine safety debate within NASA. Should the agency proceed with the existing heat shield design for a crewed mission, or should it redesign the heat shield before putting humans inside the spacecraft? NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman ultimately decided to proceed after reviewing the engineering analysis, but some participants in the safety review continued to object. This is a story about institutional decision-making under uncertainty, about the tension between schedule pressure and safety culture, about the political dynamics that influence risk tolerance in government agencies. It is exactly the kind of story that a public with structural understanding would find essential, and it is exactly the kind of story that the spectacle economy's format cannot communicate, because it requires sustained attention, technical context, and the ability to hold multiple competing considerations in mind simultaneously. The spectacle of the mission, the rocket launch, the Earthrise, the communications blackout, the record-breaking distance, is communicated effectively. The infrastructure beneath the spectacle, the political negotiations, the budget battles, the engineering trade-offs, the industrial partnerships, the geopolitical context, is not communicated at all. It cannot be communicated, at least not through the formats that the spectacle economy rewards. A deep analysis of the SLS rocket's cost overruns does not generate high click-through rates. A discussion of the implications of the Lunar Gateway's cancellation for international partnership frameworks does not hold viewer attention against a montage of astronauts floating in zero gravity. The structural incentives of the platform systematically favor the spectacular over the substantive. And here is where the parallel with MrBeast becomes more than an analogy. It becomes a structural identity. Both operations, NASA's Artemis II media campaign and MrBeast's YouTube channel, are producing content that serves as a loss leader for a larger economic operation. For MrBeast, the loss leader is the content, which costs $80 million more to produce than it earns, And the larger economic operation is the consumer products empire. For NASA, the loss leader is the public engagement content, which costs millions to produce and generates no direct revenue. And the larger economic operation is the maintenance of political support for a multi-billion-dollar annual budget. In both cases, the content exists not to inform but to generate attention, and the attention is monetized, whether through product sales or congressional appropriations, through mechanisms that are invisible to the audience. The audience, watching the YouTube live stream of the lunar flyby, does not see the appropriations process. They do not see the lobbying by aerospace contractors. They do not see the political calculations that determine how many billions of dollars flow to NASA in any given fiscal year. They do not see the relationship between the Artemis program and the broader geopolitical context, the competition with China's space program, the implications for rare earth mineral extraction, the military applications of space infrastructure, the relationship between space exploration funding and the prioritization of other domestic spending. They see an Earthrise, they see astronauts, they feel wonder. And the wonder, like the MrBeast thumbnail, closes the loop. It generates the engagement that justifies the content, that generates the attention, that secures the funding that makes the next mission possible. This is not conspiracy. It is system design. The spectacle economy is not a plot. It is an emergent property of a media infrastructure that has been optimized for attention capture over decades. NASA did not choose to enter the spectacle economy because it wanted to manipulate the public. It entered the spectacle economy because the spectacle economy is where the public lives. If you want to communicate with the public in 2026, you must communicate through platforms that reward spectacle. There is no alternative infrastructure. The networks that once carried space missions to the public, the CBS and NBC broadcasts of the Apollo era, have fragmented. The newspaper and magazine ecosystem that once provided deep analysis of the space program has contracted. The only communication infrastructure with the reach and immediacy to deliver a space mission to a global audience in real time is the same infrastructure that delivers MrBeast challenges and cat videos, the algorithmic attention marketplace. The contrast with the Apollo era is worth dwelling on because it reveals the full scale of the transformation. When Apollo 11 landed on the moon in 1969, the broadcast was carried by 3 television networks, CBS, NBC, and ABC, to an estimated 530 million people worldwide, making it the most watched event in history at that time. The broadcast was narrated by Walter Cronkite, who provided continuous commentary that combined factual reporting with contextual analysis. Viewers understood, through Cronkite's narration and through the broader media ecosystem of newspapers, magazines, and radio that surrounded the broadcast, not just what was happening, but why it was happening. They understood the Cold War context. They understood the budget battles. They understood the technological challenges. They understood the political stakes. The media ecosystem, imperfect as it was, provided a framework for structural understanding alongside the spectacle. In 2026, the Artemis II launch was distributed across more than a dozen platforms, generating over 17 million concurrent viewers. But the framework for structural understanding was absent. The YouTube chat was filled with emojis, memes, and real-time reactions. The algorithm recommended related content, some of it legitimate, some of it conspiracy material, some of it unrelated entertainment. And perhaps most tellingly, one of the most praised pieces of launch coverage came not from NASA itself or from a major news organization, but from a YouTuber named Jack Gordon, who was granted behind-the-scenes access and captured footage with a 1200mm lens from a vantage point closer than even the press pool. Viewers praised his footage as superior to NASA's own coverage, which had been plagued by streaming glitches and technical errors during the broadcast. The irony is extraordinary. A government agency with a $25 billion annual budget was outperformed in visual storytelling by a single content creator with a camera, because the content creator understood the platform's visual language better than the institution that was producing the actual spectacle. This is the miscontextualization engine operating in reverse. NASA, a massive institution, is being evaluated by the standards of the platform it has entered, and by the platform's standards, an individual creator with better production instincts can outperform it. The institution's advantages, its access, its expertise, its historical authority count for less than the creator's native fluency in the medium. The platform flattens the hierarchy, and in flattening the hierarchy, it transforms the public's relationship to institutional authority itself. When a YouTuber's launch footage is praised as better than NASA's, the implicit message is that institutions no longer have a monopoly on mediation. Anyone with the right equipment and the right platform fluency can tell the story. The question of who should tell the story, of whether expertise and institutional context produce better understanding than creator fluency and production instinct, is not asked. It cannot be asked within the spectacle economy's frame because the spectacle economy does not evaluate who should produce content. It evaluates what produces engagement, and engagement is agnostic about institutional authority. There is yet another dimension to consider. NASA's distribution strategy for Artemis II included streaming on Netflix, Amazon Prime, HBO Max, and other subscription platforms. This means that the same mission was being distributed through platforms that are primarily entertainment infrastructure. A viewer who opened Netflix to watch a series or a film and encountered the Artemis II live stream was processing the mission within an entertainment frame. The user interface was the same, the recommendation algorithm was the same. The viewing experience was structurally identical to watching a documentary or a reality show. The mission, which involved real human beings traveling farther from Earth than any human in history, was being delivered through an infrastructure that makes no distinction between fiction and reality, between entertainment and exploration, between a scripted drama and a live spaceflight. And so NASA optimizes. It produces astronaut shorts and launches mascot contests and streams on 7 platforms simultaneously and creates multimedia resource pages. It does this because it must, because the alternative, producing substantive, structurally deep content that explains what is actually happening and why it matters, would reach a fraction of the audience, would generate a fraction of the engagement, would produce a fraction of the political support that the program requires to exist. The irony is complete. The most complex engineering achievement of the 21st century is being communicated to the public through the same medium and the same structural logic as a video of a man giving a stranger $10,000 in an ice cream truck. There is a word that recurs throughout the internal language of digital media optimization, and that word is compression. In its technical sense, compression refers to the reduction of data to a smaller size for more efficient storage and transmission. A JPEG image is a compressed version of a raw photograph. An MP3 file is a compressed version of uncompressed audio. Compression works by identifying and removing information that the system deems redundant or imperceptible. The image loses resolution, the audio loses fidelity, but the file becomes small enough to move through the infrastructure at the speed the system requires. The spectacle economy operates on an identical principle, but applied to meaning rather than data. The system requires that information move at a specific speed, the speed of the scroll, the speed of the algorithmic recommendation, the speed of the thumbnail impression, and the only information that can move at that speed is information that has been compressed to fit. A complex geopolitical event must be compressed into a headline. A decade-long engineering program must be compressed into a launch livestream. A 14-year channel evolution must be compressed into the narrative of a kid who started giving away money and became a billionaire. The compression is not incidental. It is structural. It is the condition of entry into the attention marketplace. If you cannot be compressed, you cannot be seen. Now here's the thesis. The same media infrastructure that communicates the spectacle of a moon launch and the spectacle of a MrBeast challenge is, simultaneously and by the same mechanism, rendering invisible the deeper systems that actually govern the distribution of power, resources, and life chances in the world. Not because those systems are secret, not because they are hidden by conspiracy, but because they cannot be compressed. Consider what was happening in the world while Artemis II was dominating attention. The global trade system was undergoing its most significant restructuring in decades. Tariff policies were reshaping supply chains across every major industry. The relationship between the United States and its trading partners was being renegotiated through mechanisms, executive orders, legislative battles, judicial reviews that were individually complex and collectively almost incomprehensible. The implications of these changes for employment, for consumer prices, for the viability of entire industries, for the geopolitical balance of power were enormous, but they were also, critically, uncompressible. You cannot explain the second-order effects of a tariff on semiconductor imports in a thumbnail. You cannot convey the implications of a shift in marine insurance underwriting practices through a YouTube title. You cannot generate a click-through rate with a video about the relationship between the petrodollar system and the pricing of crude oil futures. And so these things, which matter more to the material conditions of people's lives than any YouTube video or any moon mission, remain invisible, not suppressed, not censored, invisible. They exist in the information ecosystem, but they exist in a form that cannot compete for attention against content that has been engineered for compression. A deep analysis of the Strait of Hormuz's role in global energy logistics is available to anyone who searches for it. But the search does not happen, because the algorithm has already served the viewer something that is more engaging, more emotionally resonant, more visually compelling, and more efficiently compressed. The viewer does not choose to remain ignorant of the Strait of Hormuz. They are never given the choice in any meaningful sense. The choice has already been made for them by the system's structural incentives. This is the compression thesis, that the spectacle economy functions as a mechanism of attention allocation that systematically directs human cognitive resources toward information that has been optimized for emotional engagement and away from information that is structurally complex, contextually dense, and resistant to simplification. The result is not ignorance in the traditional sense. People in 2026 have access to more information than any generation in history. The result is something more specific and more insidious, a condition in which the information that is most consumed is the information that is least structurally important, and the information that is most structurally important is the information that is least consumed. Let me be specific about the hidden layers, because the point is not that complexity exists in the abstract. The point is that specific systems, operating at specific scales, with specific implications for specific populations, are rendered invisible by the compression mechanism. Start with energy. The global energy system is a network of extraordinary complexity that governs the price of virtually everything humans consume. At its center is the crude oil market, which is denominated in US dollars, a fact that has profound implications for American monetary policy, for the value of the dollar, for the ability of the United States to run large fiscal deficits, and for the relationship between the US and oil-producing nations. The petrodollar system, established in the 1970s through agreements between the United States and Saudi Arabia, created a framework in which oil-producing nations denominated their exports in dollars and recycled their surplus revenues into U.S. Treasury securities. This framework provided the United States with a structural advantage in the global financial system, a guaranteed demand for dollars that suppressed interest rates, enabled deficit spending, and financed the military infrastructure that, in turn, protected the sea lanes through which oil was transported. This system is currently under pressure. Multiple oil-producing nations have explored or implemented alternatives to dollar-denominated oil sales. The geopolitical relationships that sustain the petrodollar framework are shifting. The implications of these shifts for U.S. interest rates, for the viability of American fiscal policy, for the pricing of consumer goods, for the stability of the global financial system are enormous. But they are also incompressible. You cannot explain the petrodollar in a thumbnail, and so the petrodollar, which affects every American's purchasing power, cost of living, and economic security, exists outside the spectacle economy's field of vision. Move to logistics. The global supply chain is a network of container ships, port facilities, insurance contracts, and regulatory frameworks that moves approximately 90% of the world's traded goods. Marine insurance, specifically, is a system that most people have never heard of, but that governs the viability of global trade. When a container ship transits the Suez Canal or the Strait of Hormuz or the Strait of Malacca, it does so under an insurance policy that prices the risk of piracy, war, weather, and mechanical failure. Changes in these insurance premiums, driven by geopolitical events, military conflicts, or changes in the regulatory environment, can redirect trade flows, alter shipping routes, and change the price of goods on shelves thousands of miles away. When insurance premiums for Red Sea transit increase due to regional conflict, shippers reroute around the Cape of Good Hope, adding weeks to delivery times and billions to costs that are ultimately passed to consumers. Let me be specific about the scale of what is invisible here. The Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula, is approximately 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. Through this strait passes roughly 20 to 21% of the world's daily oil consumption. That means 1/5 of the global energy supply transits a body of water that is narrower than the distance from one side of Manhattan to the other. The pricing of marine insurance for vessels transiting this strait is determined by syndicates operating through Lloyd's of London, a marketplace that most people have never heard of, but that has been the center of global marine insurance since the 17th century. When geopolitical tensions in the region increase, when military assets are deployed, when diplomatic relationships deteriorate, the syndicates at Lloyd's adjust their war risk premiums. A vessel that could previously transit the Strait of Hormuz for a standard insurance premium may suddenly face a war risk surcharge that adds hundreds of thousands of dollars to a single transit. This cost is passed to the shipping company, which passes it to the cargo owner, which passes it to the distributor, which passes it to the retailer, which passes it to the consumer. The person buying groceries in Ohio is paying a price that is partially determined by the risk assessment of an insurance syndicate in London responding to a military deployment near a strait they have never heard of. And no thumbnail in the history of YouTube has ever communicated this causal chain. This is not an abstract example. It is the actual mechanism through which geopolitical events become consumer prices. And it operates continuously across thousands of shipping routes, thousands of insurance policies, and thousands of interconnected supply chains. Every product in every store has a price that is partially determined by this invisible network. The television on the shelf was shipped in a container that was insured by a policy that was priced based on the war risk assessment of every waterway along the route from the factory in Vietnam to the port in Long Beach. The food on the shelf was transported in a refrigerated container whose insurance premium reflected the risk of piracy in the Gulf of Aden and the probability of port congestion in Rotterdam. These are not minor variables. They are, in aggregate, among the most significant determinants of the prices that consumers pay. And they are completely, totally, structurally invisible in the spectacle economy. These dynamics are invisible not because they are obscure, but because they are structurally resistant to the compression that the attention marketplace requires. A shipping route change cannot be photographed in a way that generates emotional engagement, An insurance premium adjustment cannot be narrativized in a way that holds viewer attention against a video of someone winning $1 million. The invisibility is a function of format, not of relevance. Move to trade policy. Tariffs, which are taxes imposed on imported goods, are among the most consequential economic policy tools available to a government. A tariff on steel affects the cost of every product that uses steel: cars, appliances, buildings, infrastructure. A tariff on semiconductors affects the cost of every electronic device. A tariff on agricultural products affects the cost of food. The cascading effects of tariff policies ripple through supply chains, affect employment in industries that the policy was not designed to target, alter the competitive dynamics between domestic and foreign producers, and redistribute wealth in ways that are often counterintuitive. A tariff designed to protect domestic manufacturing jobs may increase the cost of inputs for other domestic industries, eliminating more jobs than it creates. But the analysis required to trace these second and third order effects is complex, requires data, requires expertise, and requires the kind of sustained attention that the spectacle economy's scroll-based interface is designed to prevent. Move to monetary policy. The Federal Reserve's decisions about interest rates affect the cost of borrowing for every person and business in America. A quarter-point increase in the federal funds rate changes the monthly payment on a 30-year mortgage, the interest rate on a car loan, the cost of carrying credit card debt, the discount rate used to value stocks, the attractiveness of U.S. Treasury securities to foreign investors, and the relative value of the dollar in international exchange. Each of these effects has its own set of downstream consequences. The relationships between them are nonlinear, context-dependent, and resistant to simplification. A responsible explanation of what a Fed rate decision means for a typical American family would require 20 to 30 minutes of careful, nuanced discussion. That discussion does not generate the engagement metrics that the spectacle economy rewards. And move, finally, to the hidden layers directly beneath Artemis II itself, the layers that the spectacle of the moon mission renders invisible even as it consumes the public's attention. The Artemis program does not exist in a vacuum. It exists within a web of geopolitical, industrial, and political relationships that determine its shape, its budget, and its trajectory. The SLS rocket's core stage is manufactured at the Michoud Assembly Facility in New Orleans, Louisiana. The RS-25 engines are built by Aerojet Rocketdyne. The solid rocket boosters are manufactured by Northrop Grumman in Promontory, Utah. The Orion spacecraft service module is built by Airbus Defence and Space in Europe, under a contract with the European Space Agency. Each of these industrial relationships corresponds to a congressional district, a set of jobs, a lobbying operation, and a political constituency. The decision to build the SLS using shuttle-derived technology rather than developing a new rocket from scratch was not purely an engineering decision. It was a political decision, shaped by the desire to maintain the workforce and industrial base established during the Space Shuttle program. The districts that build rocket components have congressional representatives who sit on authorization and appropriations committees. The aerospace contractors who benefit from Artemis contracts employ lobbyists who shape the legislative language that determines how much money flows to the program and how it is spent. None of this is secret. It is documented in congressional records, Inspector General reports, and Government Accountability Office audits. The NASA Office of Inspector General has published detailed analyses of cost overruns, schedule delays, and management issues within the Artemis program. These reports are publicly available, but they are not spectacle. They cannot be compressed into thumbnails. They do not generate the emotional engagement that the algorithm rewards. And so they exist in a parallel information universe, technically accessible but functionally invisible, while the spectacle of the launch, the Earthrise, the astronaut stories, occupies the entirety of the public's attention bandwidth. There is a specific irony in the timing of Artemis II that illustrates this compression mechanism with painful clarity. The mission launched on April 1st, 2026, during a period in which American trade policy was undergoing dramatic shifts, in which the implications of tariff decisions were cascading through global supply chains, in which the relationship between the United States and its economic partners was being fundamentally renegotiated. These developments, which affected the prices Americans pay for goods, the jobs they hold, the industries that survive or fail, received a fraction of the public attention that the moon mission received. Not because they were less important. They were, by almost any measure, more important to the daily lives of more people. But they could not compete with the spectacle. A rocket launch is visually spectacular. A tariff schedule is not. An Earthrise photograph triggers wonder. A trade flow analysis does not. The compression threshold, the minimum level of spectacle required to enter the attention marketplace, is set by the most spectacular content available. And when a moon mission is available, the threshold rises to a level that virtually no policy analysis can clear. And this is the deeper point. The spectacle economy does not just compete with complex information for attention. It trains the cognitive habits that make complex information increasingly difficult to process. The scroll-based interface rewards rapid evaluation and quick decision-making. Should I click or should I scroll? This trains a mode of cognitive engagement that is optimized for speed and minimal depth. The viewer's neural pathways are, over time, shaped by the medium. They become better at rapid visual assessment and worse at sustained, structured analysis. The medium does not just deliver content, it shapes the cognitive apparatus through which content is processed. And the cognitive apparatus it shapes is one that is increasingly incapable of engaging with the systems that actually govern its owner's life. This is not a conspiracy. It is not a deliberate strategy by any individual actor. It is the emergent outcome of a system optimized for a single metric: engagement. And the reason it matters, the reason it is not just an academic observation but a structural crisis, is that the systems being rendered invisible are the systems that determine whether people eat, whether they have shelter, whether they can access healthcare, whether they have employment, whether their children inherit a stable economy or a collapsing one. The spectacle captures the eye. The invisible systems determine the fate. And the gap between what captures the eye and what determines the fate is widening. This is what MrBeast's evolution and NASA's content strategy reveal when you study them not as individual phenomena, but as symptoms of a shared structural condition. Both are operating rationally within the incentive structure of the spectacle economy. Both are producing content that is optimized for attention capture. And both, by doing so successfully, are contributing to the allocation of attention towards spectacle and away from the systems that the spectacle obscures. Not because they intend to obscure anything, but because the system in which they operate rewards spectacle and punishes complexity. And in that system, the most important things in the world are, by definition, the hardest to see. There's a feature of the spectacle economy that operates at a level deeper than content production, deeper than thumbnail optimization, deeper even than the compression of complexity. It is the mechanism through which discourse itself, the conversations, arguments, debates, and controversies that content generates, becomes a form of distribution. In the spectacle economy, discourse is not a response to content. It is a product of content. And more precisely, it is a distribution channel for content. The argument about the content is what spreads the content. The controversy is the marketing. The debate is the algorithm's fuel. This mechanism is operating at full capacity around both of the phenomena we have been examining. Around MrBeast, there exists a permanent ecosystem of discourse that functions as a self-sustaining distribution engine. The philanthropy debate: is he genuinely generous, or is he exploiting people's desperation for content? The employee treatment discourse: reports of demanding work conditions at Beast Industries. The Lunchly controversy: nutrition advocates criticized sodium levels. TikTok videos documenting mold generated 8 million views. The ethical consumption debate: is it moral to profit from poverty, from homelessness, from financial desperation, by turning those conditions into entertainment? Each of these discourses generates its own content: response videos, commentary videos, analysis videos, reaction videos. Each piece of discourse content generates its own engagement, and each unit of engagement drives more people back to the original MrBeast content, because the discourse is incomprehensible without having seen the content that generated it. This is a self-amplifying loop. Content generates discourse. Discourse generates more content. That content generates more discourse. And at every stage of the loop, the algorithm is rewarding the engagement, surfacing the videos, recommending the commentary, feeding the controversy into the recommendation pipelines of millions of viewers who did not seek it out. The controversy does not damage MrBeast's brand. It distributes it. Every criticism is a piece of marketing. Every debate is a piece of outreach. The discourse ecosystem is, functionally, an unpaid marketing department with millions of employees who believe they are criticizing the operation they are actually promoting. This is not unique to MrBeast. It is a structural feature of the spectacle economy. But MrBeast's operation has internalized this feature more completely than almost any other media entity. The content is designed not just to generate views, but to generate discourse. The extreme premises, the staggering sums of money, the ethical ambiguities, all of these are features that produce not just viewer engagement, but viewer opinion. And opinion, in the spectacle economy, is the highest quality form of engagement, because opinion drives sharing, drives conversation, drives return visits, and drives the creation of secondary content that extends the reach of the original. There is a specific economics to this that is worth articulating precisely. In the attention marketplace, different forms of engagement have different values. A passive view, where someone watches a video without forming an opinion or taking any action, generates the lowest value. It contributes to watch time, but produces no secondary distribution. A like or a subscribe generates slightly more value because it signals to the algorithm that the content has triggered a positive response, which increases the probability of recommendation. But an opinion, a formed judgment about the content that the viewer feels compelled to share, argue for, or create content about, generates the highest value because it initiates a chain of secondary engagement that extends far beyond the original content. One viewer who forms an opinion and posts a comment generates more algorithmic value than 100 viewers who watch passively. One commentary creator who makes a response video generates more distribution than 1,000 passive viewers. The spectacle economy, therefore, does not optimize for views. It optimizes for opinion formation. And the content that produces the most opinions, the content that is most ethically ambiguous, most culturally provocative, most open to interpretation, is the content that generates the most value. This is why MrBeast's content occupies the precise position it does on the ethical spectrum. It is not clearly exploitative, because the recipients of the money appear to benefit and to consent. It is not clearly altruistic, because the giver profits enormously from the spectacle of giving. It sits exactly on the boundary between exploitation and generosity, in the zone of maximum ambiguity. And maximum ambiguity is maximum opinion generation. If the content were clearly exploitative, the discourse would resolve quickly, "This is bad, stop watching." If the content were clearly altruistic, the discourse would also resolve quickly. "This is good, feel good about watching." But because it is neither, because every viewer must make their own judgment about where the line falls, the discourse never resolves. And irresolution, in the spectacle economy, is the most valuable state a piece of content can achieve. It is the engine of perpetual distribution. The algorithm reinforces this dynamic through a specific mechanical process that is worth understanding. When a video generates a high ratio of comments to views, which is what happens when the content provokes opinion formation, the algorithm interprets this as a signal of high-quality engagement. It surfaces the video to more viewers, which generates more comments, which generates a higher comment-to-view ratio, which surfaces it to still more viewers. This is a positive feedback loop with no natural termination point. The loop continues as long as the content continues to generate opinions, which means the loop continues as long as the content remains ambiguous. A video that resolves its own ambiguity, that makes its ethical position clear, that tells the viewer what to think, terminates the loop. A video that maintains ambiguity perpetuates the loop. The algorithm, without anyone having designed it for this purpose, has become a machine for rewarding irresolution and punishing clarity. Now apply this framework to NASA and Artemis II. The moon missions have always generated discourse, but the discourse has changed in character. In the 1960s, the Apollo program generated discourse about national pride, Cold War competition, and the allocation of public resources. The discourse was conducted through newspapers, magazines, and television commentary. It was mediated by professional journalists and public intellectuals. It moved slowly. It was, relative to the current environment, structured and contained. The discourse around Artemis II operates in a fundamentally different medium. It is conducted through social media, YouTube commentary, Reddit threads, X posts, and TikTok reactions. It is unmediated by professional gatekeepers. It moves at the speed of the algorithm. And it includes, as a prominent component, a layer of discourse that the Apollo era could not have produced: conspiracy discourse. Moon landing conspiracy theories have existed since the 1970s. The claim that the Apollo missions were faked, that the footage was shot on a soundstage, that the Van Allen radiation belts would have killed the astronauts, has persisted as a minority belief for over 50 years. But the spectacle economy has given this discourse a new function. In the algorithmic attention marketplace, conspiracy content generates extraordinary engagement. It triggers strong emotional responses: outrage from those who believe the missions were real, validation from those who believe they were faked, curiosity from those who have not formed an opinion. These emotional responses produce the engagement signals, comments, shares, long watch times, revisits, that the algorithm interprets as indicators of quality content. The algorithm does not evaluate the truth of the content. It evaluates the engagement. And conspiracy content, by its nature, generates more engagement than sober factual analysis. NASA's Artemis II media strategy can be read, in part, as a response to this dynamic. By producing high-quality, visually compelling, emotionally engaging content about the mission, NASA is competing for attention in the same algorithmic marketplace where conspiracy content circulates. The spectacular footage, the Earthrise, the astronaut communications, the launch sequence, serves not just as documentation, but as a counter-spectacle, a piece of content that is more visually impressive, more emotionally resonant, and more shareable than the conspiracy videos that claim the mission is a hoax. But here is the paradox. The counter-spectacle strategy requires NASA to operate on the same terms as the conspiracy content. Both are competing for the same algorithmic attention. Both must generate engagement. Both must be compressed into formats that work within the platform's constraints. And by engaging on these terms, NASA implicitly validates the framework in which the truth of the mission is just one content category among many, competing for clicks alongside alternative narratives. The very act of producing spectacular content to combat skepticism reinforces the spectacle economy's fundamental premise that truth is a function of engagement, that credibility is a function of production value, and that the most compelling narrative wins regardless of its relationship to reality. There is a deeper layer still. The conspiracy discourse around the moon landing is, in a sense, a distorted expression of a legitimate intuition. The intuition is that the information being presented to the public is not the full picture, that there are hidden layers, hidden interests, hidden complexities that the spectacle does not reveal. This intuition is correct. As we discussed in the previous section, the spectacle economy systematically renders invisible the structural systems that govern public life. The petrodollar, marine insurance underwriting, trade policy cascading effects, monetary policy implications, all of these are genuinely hidden from public view, not by conspiracy, but by the compression mechanism. The conspiracy theorist senses the hiddenness correctly, but identifies the wrong hidden thing. They see the spectacle and sense that something is being concealed, and they construct a narrative, the faked moon landing, the secret government program, the alien contact that fills the gap. The narrative is wrong, but the sense that there is a gap is right. And NASA, by producing ever more spectacular content to counter the conspiracy narrative, inadvertently widens the gap. The more polished and emotionally compelling the official content becomes, the more it resembles the production value-driven content that the spectacle economy rewards, and the more it triggers the suspicion, in those already inclined towards skepticism, that what they are seeing is manufactured. The spectacle becomes evidence of the spectacle. The better NASA gets at content production, the more it looks, to the conspiracy-minded, like a studio production. The medium undermines the message. This same dynamic operates around MrBeast, though in a different register. The discourse about MrBeast's philanthropy, whether it is genuine or exploitative, whether it helps or harms, whether it is charity or content, is a discourse that exists because the spectacle of giving away money is inherently ambiguous. The viewer cannot determine, from the spectacle alone, whether the intent behind the giving is altruistic or commercial. And this ambiguity is not a bug. It is the engine of the discourse. If the intent were clear, the discourse would end. The discourse persists because the spectacle is designed to be irresolvable, to generate opinion without resolution, to produce engagement without consensus. The irresolvability is the feature. In the spectacle economy, content that resolves a question is content that the viewer has no reason to return to. Content that leaves a question open is content that generates rewatching, revisiting, discussing, debating. The most valuable content in the spectacle economy is content that produces the longest possible chain of discourse without ever reaching a conclusion. And the most effective way to produce irresolvable content is to present spectacles that contain genuine ethical ambiguity, that can be interpreted plausibly from multiple perspectives, and that therefore generate multiple competing commentary ecosystems, each of which drives attention back to the original content. MrBeast's content achieves this effortlessly. Is it good to give a homeless person $100,000 on camera? Is it exploitation or generosity? Should the person's consent be enough, or does the power asymmetry make consent impossible? Is the emotional response of the recipient genuine or performed for the camera? Is the audience's pleasure in watching a form of compassion or a form of voyeurism? None of these questions has a definitive answer. And so the discourse continues, and the discourse is the distribution, and the distribution is the revenue, and the revenue funds the next video, and the next video generates the next discourse. The loop is complete. This is what discourse as distribution means in practice. It means that the information ecosystem is organized not around the resolution of questions, but around their perpetuation. It means that the most valuable content is the content that generates the most disagreement. It means that nuance, which might resolve ambiguity and therefore terminate discourse, is systematically disadvantaged relative to provocation, which perpetuates it. And it means that the public conversation about the most visible phenomena in the culture, from YouTube philanthropy to moon missions, is structurally incapable of reaching the depth of analysis that those phenomena require. Because depth resolves ambiguity, and resolved ambiguity kills engagement. And dead engagement is the one thing the spectacle economy cannot survive. The discourse economy and the spectacle economy are not separate systems. They are the same system, viewed from different angles. Spectacle generates discourse. Discourse distributes spectacle. The loop feeds itself. And inside the loop, the actual structural conditions of the world, the trade policies, the monetary systems, the energy infrastructure, the logistical networks rotate in their orbit, unseen and uncompressed, determining the fates of billions, while the discourse argues about whether a man should give away money on camera. There is one final manifestation of this dynamic that deserves examination because it reveals the system operating at its most naked. During the Artemis II mission, YouTube was flooded with fake livestream channels. These channels used titles like Happening Now, Artemis II Lunar Landing, even though the mission was a flyby, not a landing, or Live, NASA astronauts walk on the moon. even though no moonwalk was planned. They looped old footage, sometimes from Artemis I, sometimes from Apollo-era broadcasts, and ran advertisements against the views they generated. The channels were not producing content in any meaningful sense. They were producing thumbnails and titles. They were producing discourse triggers. The fake live streams existed solely to intercept the search traffic and recommendation flow generated by the real mission and convert it into advertising revenue. They were parasitic on the spectacle, extracting value from the attention that NASA's genuine achievement had generated without contributing anything to public understanding. But here is the structural point. The platform's infrastructure could not distinguish, or chose not to distinguish, between the real NASA broadcast and the fake loops. Both appeared in search results. Both appeared in recommendations. Both competed for the same viewers. The algorithm evaluated both based on engagement metrics, not on truth. And because the fake streams used more sensational titles, lunar landing instead of lunar flyby, they sometimes generated more engagement than the real coverage. The system was, in effect, rewarding disinformation about a space mission that was happening in real time. Not because anyone at YouTube decided to reward disinformation, but because the system's architecture does not include truth as a variable. It includes engagement, and engagement is agnostic about accuracy. This is discourse as distribution taken to its logical extreme. The discourse around Artemis II, the excitement, the curiosity, the searches, the clicks, created a distribution infrastructure that could be exploited by anyone with the ability to produce a convincing thumbnail. The discourse did not care whether the content it distributed was real. It cared only that the content generated engagement. The fake live streamers understood this. They did not need to produce content. They needed to produce spectacle signals, titles, and thumbnails that triggered the engagement response, and the system would do the rest. They had, in effect, identified the minimum viable spectacle. Not a video, not a production, not even a coherent piece of content, just a title and a thumbnail designed to capture the attention that the real spectacle had generated. This is the end state of discourse as distribution. When the discourse becomes so powerful as a distribution mechanism that it can be exploited without producing any underlying content at all, when the thumbnail and the title become the entire product, when the spectacle is reduced to its absolute minimum, a signal rather than an event, and the signal alone is sufficient to capture attention, generate engagement, and extract value. We are already there, and the trajectory from here does not lead to correction. It leads to acceleration, because every entity that operates within the spectacle economy, from MrBeast to NASA to the fake live streamers, is subject to the same structural incentive: produce more spectacle, generate more discourse, capture more attention. And the system rewards them all, proportional not to their contribution to understanding, but to their ability to generate the engagement that the algorithm demands. We have arrived at the end of the analysis, but the phenomenon we are describing has no end in sight. The spectacle economy is not a phase. It is not a trend that will be replaced by the next media paradigm. It is the media paradigm. And like all paradigms, it will evolve, it will mutate, it will incorporate new technologies and new platforms, but its fundamental logic, the optimization of human attention through the production of astonishment, will persist as long as the infrastructure that rewards it remains in place. So let us ask the question directly. Where does this go? Start with the convergence. What we have documented across the preceding 9 sections is the progressive collapse of distinctions that once organized the media landscape into separate domains. The distinction between entertainment and information, the distinction between individual creator and institutional operation, the distinction between commercial product and public service, the distinction between government communication and influencer content, the distinction between spectacle and substance. Each of these distinctions has been eroded, not by deliberate action, but by the structural incentives of a platform ecosystem that does not recognize them. The algorithm treats a NASA live stream and a MrBeast challenge and a political commentary video and a cooking tutorial as structurally identical objects competing for the same resource, attention. And because they are treated as structurally identical by the system that distributes them, they are progressively becoming structurally identical in their production, their formatting, and their relationship to truth. This convergence has a trajectory, and the trajectory points toward a media environment in which every entity, whether it is an individual, a corporation, a government agency, a political party, a nonprofit, a university, or a religious institution, operates as a content producer within the spectacle economy. We are already well into this trajectory. Universities produce TikTok content to attract applicants. Political campaigns produce YouTube ads formatted as creator content. Hospitals produce Instagram reels about medical procedures. The Department of Defense produces recruitment content on Twitch. Churches live stream services with production values that rival entertainment programming. Each of these entities has made a rational calculation. The attention marketplace is where the audience is, and to reach the audience, you must produce content that competes within the attention marketplace's rules. But rationality at the individual level does not guarantee rationality at the system level. Each entity's decision to enter the spectacle economy is individually rational, Collectively, the decisions produce an information environment in which every piece of communication from every source is formatted for attention capture rather than understanding. The signal-to-noise ratio does not merely decline. The concept of signal itself is redefined. In the spectacle economy, the signal is the engagement. The noise is anything that does not engage. And by this definition, a deep analysis of monetary policy is noise, while a video of someone being surprised by a large check is signal. The system's internal definition of relevance has inverted the relationship between importance and visibility. Now, there is a counterargument to this analysis, and it deserves acknowledgement. The counterargument says that the spectacle economy, while it does compress information and reward engagement over depth, also provides unprecedented access to information for those who seek it. Anyone with an internet connection can find, if they choose to look, detailed analyses of trade policy, monetary economics, energy geopolitics, and every other complex system we have discussed. The information is there. The spectacle economy does not suppress it. It simply does not promote it. And the individual's failure to seek out complex information is a failure of individual agency, not a systemic failure. This counterargument has merit. The information is, indeed, available, but the counterargument misunderstands the nature of the system's effect. The spectacle economy does not merely fail to promote complex information. It actively shapes the cognitive habits that determine whether an individual is capable of seeking and processing complex information. When the primary interface between a person and the information ecosystem is a scroll-based feed optimized for rapid visual evaluation, the person's cognitive patterns adapt to that interface. They become proficient at rapid assessment. They become less proficient at sustained attention. They develop an intuitive sense of what counts as valuable information, and that sense is calibrated by the algorithm's reward structure, which defines value as engagement. Over time, the person does not choose to avoid complex information. They become someone for whom complex information does not register as relevant. Their attention system has been trained by years of interaction with the spectacle economy's interface to filter for spectacle and filter out complexity. The information is available, but the cognitive apparatus required to engage with it has been gradually reshaped by the very medium through which information is delivered. The medium, as Marshall McLuhan argued 60 years ago, is the message. But McLuhan could not have imagined a medium as powerful, as pervasive, and as precisely optimized as the algorithmic attention marketplace. This brings us to what I will call the spectacle horizon, the point at which the spectacle economy's optimization of attention becomes so complete that the cognitive infrastructure required for structural understanding can no longer be maintained at a population level. The spectacle horizon is not a cliff. It is not a moment of collapse. It is a gradient, a slow, progressive erosion of the collective capacity to hold complex systems in mind, to trace second and third order effects, to understand causation rather than correlation, and to evaluate claims based on evidence rather than engagement. We may already be past the spectacle horizon for certain domains. The percentage of the population that can explain how the Federal Reserve's interest rate decisions affect their personal finances is, by most measures, vanishingly small. The percentage that can explain the relationship between energy policy and consumer prices is not much larger. The percentage that can trace the causal chain from a tariff decision to a change in the price of a specific product in a specific store is smaller still. These are not esoteric topics. They are the mechanisms that govern daily life. And they are invisible, not because they are hidden, but because the cognitive infrastructure required to see them has been eroded by a media environment that rewards seeing something else. MrBeast's empire is, in this light, a monument to the spectacle horizon. It is the most successful operation in the history of the attention marketplace, and its success is inseparable from the conditions that the spectacle horizon describes. A population with the cognitive infrastructure for structural analysis would see Beast Industries not as the astonishing achievement of an individual creator, but as a venture-backed conglomerate executing a diversification strategy with zero customer acquisition cost. The astonishment would dissolve, the miscontextualization engine would fail, the spectacle gradient would flatten, but the population does not have that cognitive infrastructure because the same media environment that produced MrBeast produced the conditions under which his achievement appears miraculous rather than structural. The system creates its own audience. The audience sustains the system. The loop is closed. NASA's Artemis II, similarly, is a monument to the spectacle horizon, but from the institutional side. A population with the cognitive infrastructure for structural analysis would understand Artemis II not as a spectacle to be consumed, but as a complex engineering and political achievement to be evaluated. They would ask questions about the $23 billion development cost of the SLS rocket and whether that money could have been more efficiently spent. They would ask about the cancellation of the Lunar Gateway program and what it means for international partnership frameworks. They would ask about the relationship between the Artemis program and the broader geopolitical competition with China's space ambitions. They would ask about the political economy of aerospace contracting, about which congressional districts benefit from which contracts, about the lobbying infrastructure that shapes budget decisions. These questions are not hostile to the space program. They are the questions that a population engaged in structural understanding would naturally ask. But the spectacle economy does not produce these questions. It produces wonder. And wonder, while beautiful and while genuinely valuable as a human experience, is not understanding. It is, in the spectacle economy's framework, a substitute for understanding. There is one final dimension to this analysis that deserves attention, and it concerns the relationship between the spectacle economy and the concept of truth itself. In a media environment where credibility is a function of production value, where the most watched content is the most believed content, and where the algorithmic recommendation system does not distinguish between accurate and inaccurate claims, the concept of truth begins to decouple from its traditional foundations, evidence, expertise, institutional verification, and reattach to a new foundation, engagement. What is true becomes, functionally, what is most watched. What is credible becomes what is most shared. What is authoritative becomes what generates the most discourse. This decoupling has consequences that extend beyond media. It extends into politics, where the most spectacle-driven candidates receive the most attention, and the most attention translates into the most votes. It extends into science, where the most click-worthy findings receive the most media coverage, and the most media coverage translates into the most funding. It extends into business, where the most spectacle-driven companies receive the most investor interest, and the most investor interest translates into the highest valuations. The spectacle economy is not just a media phenomenon. It is a selection mechanism that operates across every domain of public life, rewarding spectacle and punishing complexity at every level of the system. Let me be precise about how this selection mechanism works, because its mechanics are more specific and more consequential than the general observation that spectacle gets more attention. The spectacle economy selects for a specific type of actor within every domain. In politics, it selects for candidates who are skilled at producing engagement, which is to say, candidates who are provocative, visually compelling, and willing to compress their policy positions into spectacle-compatible formats. It selects against candidates who are skilled at governance, which is to say, candidates who understand complex systems, build coalitions, and navigate institutional constraints, skills that are structurally invisible within the spectacle economy's frame. The result, over time, is a political class that is increasingly optimized for content production and decreasingly optimized for the actual work of governing. Not because voters prefer bad governance, but because the information environment through which voters learn about candidates is an information environment that makes governance invisible and spectacle visible. In business, the spectacle economy selects for companies that are skilled at generating attention, companies with charismatic founders, dramatic origin stories, and products that can be demonstrated in visually compelling ways. It selects against companies whose value proposition is complex, whose product is infrastructural, or whose competitive advantage resides in operational efficiency rather than brand storytelling. This is why Beast Industries, with its zero customer acquisition cost model, represents a structural threat to traditional consumer brands. It is not competing on product quality, it is competing on spectacle output. And in a market where the spectacle economy determines which products the consumer is even aware of, the company that wins the spectacle competition wins the market, regardless of whether its product is superior. In science, the spectacle economy selects for research that produces spectacular findings, findings that can be compressed into headlines, that challenge conventional wisdom that promise breakthroughs. It selects against research that is incremental, replicative, methodologically rigorous but visually boring, or that produces null results. This creates a specific distortion in the scientific ecosystem. The research that receives the most attention, and therefore the most funding and the most cultural authority, is the research that is most spectacle compatible, which is not necessarily the research that is most scientifically significant. The replication crisis in psychology and biomedical research is, in part, a consequence of this selection mechanism. The spectacle economy rewarded spectacular findings, and the scientific community, operating within the spectacle economy's incentive structure, produced spectacular findings, some of which turned out to be unreplicable. In each of these domains, the spectacle economy's selection mechanism operates invisibly. No one decided to select for spectacle-optimized politicians, businesses, or scientists. The selection emerged from the structural incentives of the information environment, and the structural incentives emerged from the design of the platforms, the algorithms, the interfaces, and the business models that constitute the attention marketplace. The selection mechanism is the system. And the system is so pervasive, so foundational to how information moves in 21st century society, that operating outside it has become almost impossible for any entity that depends on public attention for its survival. And here is where we return to the beginning, to the rocket on the launch pad, to the channel with 476 million subscribers, to the question of what connects them. What connects them is not that they are both on YouTube. What connects them is that they are both products of a system that has made spectacle the primary currency of human attention and has made human attention the primary currency of economic and political power. In this system, a man who microwaves a microwave and a government that sends humans to the moon are competing on the same field, using the same tools, subject to the same incentive structures, and evaluated by the same metric. Did it generate engagement? And in this system, the things that matter most, the trade policies that determine whether industries survive or collapse, the energy systems that determine whether lights stay on or go dark, the monetary decisions that determine whether families can afford their mortgages, the logistical networks that determine whether goods arrive at all, these things exist in a domain that the spectacle economy cannot reach, not because they are secret, not because they are boring, but because they are complex. And complexity in the spectacle economy is the one thing that cannot be optimized for. It is the one thing that resists compression. It is the one thing that the thumbnail cannot contain. The spectacle horizon is the line beyond which complexity disappears from public view. We have crossed it. We are living on the other side. And the most remarkable thing about living on the other side is that it does not feel like anything has changed. The screens are bright. The content is engaging. The spectacles are spectacular. The MrBeast flywheel spins. Attention becomes revenue, becomes spectacle, becomes attention. The Artemis loop closes. Wonder becomes engagement, becomes political support, becomes funding, becomes mission, becomes wonder. The derivative trades at face value. The emotional frequency propagates, the discourse distributes, the compression threshold rises. And somewhere beneath it all, the actual systems, the petrodollar arrangements, and the marine insurance markets, and the tariff cascades, and the monetary policy transmissions, and the supply chain logistics, and the aerospace contracting networks, and the energy infrastructure dependencies, continue to operate in their own dimension, following their own logic, producing their own consequences, indifferent to whether anyone is watching, indifferent to whether anyone understands, indifferent to whether the civilization that depends on them has retained the cognitive infrastructure to see them at all. The question is not whether the spectacle economy will continue. It will. The question is whether, within it, there is any mechanism capable of rewarding the kind of understanding that the spectacle economy has been designed to displace. Whether there is a format, a platform, a distribution channel, a business model that can make structural complexity as engaging as a man giving away $1 million. Whether the human cognitive apparatus, shaped by millions of years of evolution to respond to novelty, danger, and social comparison, can be redirected towards systems thinking without losing the audience that systems thinking needs to reach. These are not rhetorical questions. They are engineering problems, and they are the most important engineering problems of the 21st century. More important than going to the moon, more important than building a $5 billion consumer products empire. Because if the spectacle economy continues on its current trajectory, we will have a civilization that can send 4 people around the moon and stream it live to 17 million viewers. But that cannot explain to those viewers why the interest rate on their mortgage just changed, or why the price of groceries just went up, or why the factory in their town just closed, or why the world they live in feels increasingly governed by forces they cannot see, cannot name, and cannot compress into a thumbnail. That is the spectacle horizon. And we are all standing on it, watching the screen, waiting for the next astonishing thing.